Chapter 1477. Men quickly summoned the three great generals for a meeting, the Grand Duke of Blindness said calmly. The palace guards went to pass on the message. And just as they received the order and left, young Master Yifan also came to the palace and saw the Grand Duke of Blindness sitting there with an ugly expression on his face. "Father-in-law, are you okay?" "I'm fine." An amiable smile appeared on the blind duke's face. No matter how angry he was, as long as Ivan appeared in front of him, it would seem that all his anger would dissipate. It could be said that he didn't just like his son, he doted on him. Fortunately, Yifan was also capable and didn't let him down, so he wasn't spoiled. But even so, he dared to do some big things in private. For example, he didn't tell his father-in-law about the tunnel. And now such a thing happened in the city. The fire actually spread to the palace. Yifan certainly knew that some people in power couldn't help but take action. This was the beginning of the real chaos. He also thought that it was necessary to explain the matter to his father-in-law. "Father-in-law, your son has been hiding something from you." What is it?" The Grand Duke of Blindness said nonchalantly. Because he spoiled Ivan, there were many things that he would not report to him before doing. The Grand Duke of Blindness was already used to this. "Father-in-law, I dug a tunnel, a passage leading to the dense forest in the north of the city. Once the tunnel is dug through, we can quickly reach there from the city. As long as the attack is sudden enough, we will definitely be able to catch the Han army off guard and carve out a bloody path." Yifan opened his mouth and confessed everything. The dense forest in the north of the city? A passage? At this moment the blind Grand Duke finally couldn't stay calm. His face revealed a nervous expression. He had to admit that this was indeed a good way to escape. But the question was, why did Yifan tell him now? Could it be that the passage has been opened? With doubts before the blind Grand Duke could speak, Yifan continued, "It's just that I don't know why this matter was leaked. It was actually known by Great General Peter. He even sent people to investigate tonight, but they were sent away by my men." "What?" The Grand Duke of Blindness suddenly stood up. At this moment, his nearly blind eyes seemed to burst with infinite anger. "Peter knows. Where's he now?" "Right now, he's having a drink with General Boris and General Sergei at home. My men have been keeping an eye on them." At this moment, Ivan said with a guilty conscience. No matter what, his actions this time were a little overboard. Although her father-in-law might not pursue his own responsibility, it was still necessary for him to apologize. "The three of them are together? What's Peter going to do?" The blind duke quickly calmed down. He had a feeling that things were getting out of hand. He even suspected that the fire in the palace had something to do with it. The blind duke seemed to be thinking about something and didn't speak for a long time. Seeing this, Ivan said anxiously, "Father-in-law, is it because I shouldn't have dug the tunnel?" "No. There's nothing wrong with leaving an extra path. Digging the tunnel was originally one of the escape routes. This isn't wrong. However, such a secretive matter shouldn't be known to outsiders. Furthermore, since you suspect that Peter knows about this matter, why didn't you immediately control him?" The Grand Duke of Blindness shook his head and questioned him. He could allow Ivan to make some small moves and even act on his own without informing him, but he couldn't allow him to mess things up. This was especially so at such a crucial time. Facing the black flames released by the Han army's celestial sphere, the nobles and commoners of the city were already in a state of panic. Especially at such a time, everything had to be done with caution. Otherwise, the slightest carelessness could lead to a huge problem that could spiral out of control. "It's fine that you escaped through the tunnel, but it was also discovered by others. More importantly, you knew all this and didn't take any remedial measures. That's your fault. Capture Peter, including everyone in his residence," the Grand Duke of Blindness said in an unquestionable tone. Ivan couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Father-in-law Boris and Sergei are also in General Peter's residence. He indirectly meant to remind the blind duke that the two generals might know the truth now. Should they also be arrested? The blind duke's expression showed a trace of pain at this moment, but he quickly nodded and said, Arrest them all. After I talk to them, I'll consider whether to release them or not." Capturing three generals all at once, and all of them wielding great power at that. Even the Grand Duke of Blindness had to think carefully. "Understood." Ivan nodded. At this time he had to admit that he was far inferior to his father in terms of ruthlessness. It was said that kings and emperors couldn't have their own feelings. Everything had to make way for benefits. It seemed that this was indeed the case. After Ivan received the mission, he was about to bring his men to Peter's mansion. But before he could bid farewell to the Grand Duke of Blindness, he saw a guard captain rushing into the main hall with a panicked expression. Reporting to the Grand Duke, "There's a mutiny in General Peter's barracks. They rushed out of the barracks and ignored our warnings. They are running in the city and their destination seems to be our palace. This is bad." Ivan's expression changed drastically. The worst situation still happened. The blind duke's face also became much gloomier at this moment. But he quickly returned to normal. "Don't be afraid, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. Peter alone can't overturn the sky. How about this, Ivan? Immediately mobilize your soldiers to guard the palace. At the same time, find the soldiers who are familiar with Peter's generals and ask them to help persuade them. I believe these people will know what to do." The Grand Duke of Blindness was indeed not panicked, because he knew very well that although Peter was also a general with great power, all of his power had been given by him, and the soldiers under him had also been given by him. Since he could give it now, he could take it back when he needed it one day. Ivan was infected by his father-in-law's calmness. It seemed that even if the sky fell, he wouldn't be afraid. He quickly nodded and went to gather the army. The blind duke sat high in the hall. He had to wait for this rebellion to subside. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to rest. In Peter's mansion, Boris and Sergei also heard the commotion outside. At that moment the two of them had unsightly expressions. Could it be that Peter's military camp had already made a move? If that was the case, the meaning of them staying here would be completely different. If they stayed here, would it make people think that they were already accomplices? If that was the case, based on their understanding of the Grand Duke of Blindness, it would be impossible for them to stay out of this matter. On the other hand, Peter was drinking contentedly, not caring that Boris and Sergei wanted to eat him. Of course, the reason why he could be so calm was all because of the 8 murderous guards in the room. With these guards in hand, Peter wasn't afraid that some people would use force on him. Even if he couldn't use force, he wasn't afraid at all with just his mouth. At this moment, the more Peter didn't seem to care, the angrier Boris became. He felt that he was being used. As for Sergei, he couldn't hide his emotions and directly asked, "Peter, what do you want? Are you trying to drag us into a rebellion with you?" Such a shout finally shocked Peter. He also put down his wine glass, slowly raised his head and looked at Sergei. "How can this be called a rebellion? This is looking for a way out. Or do you think that under the attack of the Han army, the Blind Duke's regime can still be maintained and developed? You. At this moment, Sergei was actually a little speechless by Peter's question. That's right, in the face of the black water that was simply impossible to guard against, and even impossible to guard against, they were completely powerless to resist, and could only passively wait for the black water to burn. If they were lucky, they might be able to live for a few more days, but once the place where the provisions were stored was burned, then chaos in the city was inevitable. If that was the case in the situation where everyone wanted to live, who would care about who the Blind Duke was? As for what he said, no one would listen to him. Sergei shut his mouth and his face turned red. Boris finally spoke up. "Peter, even if that's the case, we should think of other methods such as breaking out of the encirclement. After all, we have an army of 200,000 soldiers and plenty of firearms and cannons. If we bring them out, we might be able to carve out a path of blood." Aha. This time Peter didn't speak out against it. Instead he nodded in agreement. That's right. However, he did not know if General Boris had thought about the possibility of breaking out of the encirclement. Even if we break out, we still need someone to charge and cover the rear. If that's the case, how many of us can survive? I don't want to gamble on my luck. If I'm arranged to charge or cover the rear, I'm afraid it'll be too late to do anything. Aha. Boris, who originally wanted to say something, didn't say anything. With the Blind Duke's trust in him, he was confident that he wouldn't do those dangerous things. However, nothing was absolute. If he was really given such a dangerous mission, would he still be able to say no? If he really did that, the Grand Duke of Blindness would be the first person to not forgive him. Chapter 1478. Thinking that this possibility was not impossible, Boris's face became a little ugly. Even he couldn't guarantee that he would be safe, let alone Peter and Sergei, whose status in the heart of the Grand Duke of Blindness was far inferior to him. It was no wonder that they would have such thoughts and actions. But no matter what, Boris still didn't want to do something like rebellion. After all, the Grand Duke of Blindness had treated him well over the years. He couldn't do something like betraying his benefactor. But how was he going to say it? As long as he said this, wouldn't it prove that he wasn't on the same side as them? If this was the case, then he didn't have to do anything next. Peter would let his guards kill him. Don't doubt if Peter dared to do this. He even dared to rebel. What else wouldn't he dare to do? The two of them suddenly stopped talking. Peter's face had a little more smile. He knew that he had only convinced the two of them initially, but it was still far from being able to do big things with them. So he changed his tone and said, "Brothers, now that things have come to this, I have no choice but to do this. And you are now in my mansion, so it is absolutely impossible to stay out of this. You should think about what kind of decision to make. Time is of the essence, and there is not much time for us to hesitate and consider." Since the flag of rebellion had already been raised, they couldn't stop. Otherwise, they would be handing their lives over to others. Peter would never do such a foolish thing. So there were only two paths in front of the two. One was to follow him and the other was to oppose him and be killed now. Well, 15 minutes. Please make a decision voluntarily. No matter what the decision is, I will accept it. He. As if he had just said a very ordinary sentence, Peter sat back down after saying this. He picked up the wine glass again and drank slowly. What do you mean by, I will accept any decision? I'm afraid that once they object, it will immediately lead to a fatal disaster. This wasn't voluntary at all, it was completely forced. However, the situation was not as good as the others. At this moment, the two of them didn't dare to say anything. They could only look at each other and return to their seats. The hall once again fell into silence. There was only the heavy breathing of the 8 blade-wielding bodyguards. A huge fire suddenly broke out in Moscow and soon the sky seemed to be burning red. Yang Qindong, who was outside the city, couldn't help but notice all of this. Yang Qindong was already asleep when he received the report from the Black Cavalry. By the time he put on his clothes, the fiery red area was getting bigger and bigger. Looking at all this, Beta Persei scratched his head. "Young master, don't tell me they're really fighting amongst themselves." Yang Qindong rolled his eyes at Beta Persei. "What do you mean by really fighting amongst themselves?" Looking at the situation, it's clearly fighting amongst themselves. Yang Qindong had already expected this result, but he didn't think it would come so quickly. After all, it was only 2 days of fire. For a huge city like Moscow, it wasn't a good thing at all. Who would have thought that the other party couldn't hold it in anymore? All of this should be the doing of that guy named Nevsky. It seems that the words he said to him that day really worked. If that's the case, then so be it. Anyway, they are all different races and there is no lack of Rossi nationalists among them. Such people die, then they die. It has nothing to do with me. I just hope that more people can stay in the city. After all, if I want to build this place, I can't do without sufficient manpower. Let's go back and sleep. Yang Qindong turned around after thinking it through. He didn't put the fire in the city in his eyes at all. This matter won't end so quickly. Instead of paying attention to them, it would be more practical to inquire about how many tribes the world's best cavalry army has conquered and how many captives they have captured. In Yang Qindong's eyes, even if there was an internal conflict in Moscow, it wouldn't be resolved in a short time. Now was not the time to make a move. At this moment in the city, 15 minutes had passed. Peter was looking at Boris and Sergei, waiting for them to make the final decision. "Time's up, generals, please make the final decision," Peter said unhurriedly. Peter spoke unhurriedly, but the 8 guards beside him were already sharpening their swords, as if they would immediately turn on each other if they made the wrong choice. The 2 generals didn't look too good at Peter's pressing. In such a situation, no matter what decision they made, they would feel threatened. However, this was the truth and they couldn't resist. The more careless Peter was, the more they could feel the murderous intent behind him. "Forget it, since we are going to die anyway, we might as well fight it out. But I don't know if the Han army will accept our surrender." Finally, General Sergei couldn't remain calm and made a choice. Hearing this answer, Peter was very happy. "Brother Xia, don't worry, the Han army has already contacted us. They said that as long as we can bring the heads of the blind Duke and Ivan to them, not only will our safety be guaranteed, we will also be able to keep a part of our property." You actually contacted the Han army in advance? This can't be fake, right? At this moment even Boris was a little moved. He couldn't believe that Peter was so well prepared. However, he didn't seem to have any opportunity to contact the Han army. Don't tell me he's lying. Peter naturally heard the suspicion in Boris's voice. He knew that if he didn't explain things clearly, he wouldn't be able to convince the two of them. After thinking for a while, he told them about how Nevikov went to the Han army camp as a peace negotiator and discussed the terms of surrender with the other side. So it's like that? Hearing that it was done by Nikev, Boris really believed it. According to his understanding, Nikev was definitely capable of doing such a thing. He was living under someone else's roof and he was so well prepared. Considering that the blind duke had prepared an escape route without informing him, the choice he should make was very clear. He didn't seem to have any other choice. Okay, if that's the case, I will listen to General Peter. Boris finally nodded. At this moment, Peter couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He was really afraid of making a move against the #1 general of the Ross Duchy. The other party's influence in the army was too great. If he couldn't be friends, then he could only be killed. He definitely couldn't be an enemy. Fortunately, he didn't disappoint and convince the other party. Overjoyed, Peter nodded to the personal guard beside him. Very quickly, someone brought over a pen and paper. In front of the two generals, Peter drafted an agreement in triplicate, with the signatures and fingerprints of the 3 generals on it. In the Ross Duchy, the effect of a contract was still very strong. If someone violated it, then they would lose their credibility and would no longer be trusted by others. With this, Peter finally felt relieved. Then the 3 generals could finally sit down calmly and discuss how to rebel. This result was somewhat out of Peter's expectations. Originally, the 3 of them wouldn't have any cooperation and he was even prepared to take action. He didn't expect that they would actually choose to rebel with him. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before. He didn't know that everyone had a desire to live. Moreover, this time Ivan didn't inform them about the tunnel. This was enough to prove that when Ivan really wanted to leave, he might not necessarily bring them along. Since Ivan had already abandoned them, why should they stick their hot face to some cold ass? In any case, the 3 generals sat down together and quickly came up with a plan. Time waits for no one. The situation outside was getting more and more chaotic. Who knew what would happen as time passed? Moreover, the blind duke ruled the Rossi duchies. How could he be so easy to deal with? How could they not defeat him quickly? Accidents could happen at any time. In less than half an hour, the 2 generals left Peter's mansion. On the street, they saw the corpses on the ground. Judging from the clothes of those people, they should be the soldiers under Ivan. These people were obviously killed by Peter's soldiers. The civil war had already begun. Under Peter's arrangements, the troops sent by Ivan to capture the 3 generals were all intercepted outside the mansion. This also indicated that the conflict would escalate. If they didn't fight to the death, it would be impossible to stop the war and there would be no result. At this time, outside the palace, the sounds of killing were also incessant. West Delhi led a group of soldiers to launch fierce attacks again and again. It was just that the palace had long been on guard against outsiders, and the defense of the palace was so tight that it wasn't easy to take it down. In this terrain that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, Ivan's army had also been mobilized. Together with the palace guards, they put a lot of pressure on West Delhi, and the latter's casualties began to increase. General, this won't do. The city walls are high and the arrows are sharp. Thousands of our brothers have already died. Seeing wave after wave of soldiers charging forward and then falling down in groups, and seeing their comrades who were talking to them a moment ago turn into corpses, many of the young generals had anxious looks on their faces. There were even some who began to waver in their hearts. They were already considering whether what they were doing was right or wrong. Right now, they were only facing Ivan's army and the palace guards. Once Boris and Sergei's armies joined in and began to surround them, the final result would most likely be defeat and death. As a rebel, one didn't even need to think to know what the consequences would be. We can't retreat. We have to believe in the general. West Delhi shook his head firmly as the commander of the front line. However, the look of anticipation in his eyes from time to time betrayed his heart. He believed in General Peter, but how long had it been? Why didn't the general show up? Chapter 1479. The attack on the palace was blocked and the losses were not small. Ivan, who was in charge of guarding the palace, relaxed a lot. Men, go and tell them that we are only the leaders. As long as they are willing to lay down their weapons, they can be spared. Young master, they are rebels. Hearing that Ivan wanted to spare the rebellious soldiers, the young general beside him was puzzled. Just carry out the order. Ivan shook his head. He did not care about the young generals. This was just a matter of convenience. What he wanted now was only victory. Once he dealt with Peter, the city would be quiet again. He would continue to dig the tunnel and leave. At that time he would leave these people in the city and wait for the Han army to deal with them. What did it have to do with him whether they lived or died? Ivan had given a death order and his subordinates had no choice but to carry it out. Such shouts quickly spread out from the palace. As soon as the shouts of "execute the leader and disregard the accomplices" rang out, the already low morale of the young generals and soldiers who already had their own ideas slowed down even more, making it clear that they were only doing their job without putting in any effort. Perhaps at this time, as long as someone stood up, these soldiers would turn around and kill Sidra instead of attacking the palace. The situation was critical. Seeing that another rebellion was about to happen, and even a few young generals were looking at Sidra with unfriendly gazes, a large group of White Russian soldiers rushed over from outside the palace. Before they arrived, their voices were heard. Someone has confused the blind duke and killed their way into the palace to clean up the emperor's subordinates. The people who came were the subordinates of Boris and Sergei. Although they did not directly say that they were rebelling, the words, "clean up the emperor's subordinates," were enough to prove their position. At some point, Peter had already arrived at the front line and came to Sidra's side. His expression was very calm. "Don't panic. They are here to support us. Continue to attack." Peter's appearance was undoubtedly a stabilizing force, causing the commotion in the army to stop. Everyone did not have any other thoughts. They cooperated with the other two armies and attacked the palace again. This time it was not just two armies that came. At the same time, there were also some cannons that were hurriedly transported over. Facing the high walls of the palace, their plan was to use the cannons to create an opening and then win with superior numbers. The appearance of the cannons boosted the morale of the soldiers. They wouldn't have to risk their lives anymore. As long as the walls of the palace were breached, they would have many more opportunities. At that time, it would be the time for them to utilize the advantages of infantry in close combat. With the reinforcements, the morale of the rebel army soared. On the other hand, the situation of the White Russian army in the palace became dangerous. When the blind Grand Duke learned that Boris and Sergei had betrayed him, he finally lost his temper. He smashed an expensive porcelain on the table in front of him and threw it to the ground. Ivan, who was standing below, was also full of regret. At the end of the day, this matter was still caused by him. If he hadn't secretly dug the tunnel and was caught, this wouldn't have happened. "Father-in-law, I want to leave the palace and have a chat with the two generals," Ivan said as if he had made a decision. He only mentioned the two generals. Obviously, he had pushed Peter away, which proved that he did not intend to forgive this person. No. How could the blind Grand Duke not know what Ivan meant? But did he really think that Boris and Sergei were so easy to talk to? At this point, taking the initiative to talk to them was tantamount to sending a sheep into a tiger's mouth. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to come back easily. The blind Grand Duke was old. He would rather take the risk himself than let his son do this. "Ivan, the future of the Russian Empire will be in your hands. No matter what, nothing can happen to you. You carry our hope for the future. How about this? Immediately arrange for people to break out. As long as you break out of the palace, find a place to hide in the city. Remember, you must not be found. Then I can die in peace." "Father-in-law." At this moment, the tears in Ivan's eyes finally flowed down uncontrollably. "Okay, go and prepare. Take advantage of the darkness to break out." The blind Grand Duke waved his hand with a trace of pity on his face. After leaving this time, he really didn't know when they would meet again. "Father-in-law." After Ivan shouted again, he knelt down in front of the blind Grand Duke. This kneeling was also out of reluctance but more of gratitude. Go. Remember, don't be so willful in the future," the blind Grand Duke said with a forced smile. When Ivan heard this, he couldn't stop crying. Unknowingly, he seemed to have grown a lot and matured a lot. That night, just as the artillery was transported to the outside of the palace, the gate of the palace suddenly opened and thousands of soldiers rushed out. Their appearance caught the unprepared Peter's three-way coalition army off guard. Soon they broke out of the encirclement and rushed out. Peter was quite angry about this matter. If the blind Grand Duke and young Master Ivan were among the people who rushed out, wouldn't they be unable to complete the Han army's order? Fortunately, not long after, the blind Grand Duke's figure appeared on the gate tower of the palace. As soon as the blind Grand Duke appeared, the soldiers on both sides stopped what they were doing without prior agreement. This old man had ruled the Rossi principalities for decades and led them from weak to strong. Whether it was in the army or among the people, he still had a high prestige. Normally, as soon as he appeared and casually said a word, everyone would kneel down and worship him. But now his appearance only caused everyone to stop fighting. A hero past his prime, this saying was the most appropriate thing to say about the blind Grand Duke. Standing on the wall of the palace, the blind Grand Duke shouted in a loud voice, "We are all Rossi people. Let's not fight anymore. Let's do things that hurt our loved ones and please our enemies. Don't you want this king's life? Come, I won't resist. You can do whatever you want, but you can't hurt the guards of the palace. After all, they were once your brothers. As long as you swear to do this, I will allow you to tie me up as you wish." Grand Duke. For a moment, because of these words, countless guards knelt down. They were all moved by the blind Grand Duke's loyalty. At this time they wanted to use all their strength to fight to the death with the rebel army outside. It had to be said that the blind Grand Duke's method of bewitching people was superb. At this time his words had completely restored the army's morale that had fallen. However, his mind was not on the civil war at all. He was indeed prepared to be tied up. This was also because he saw that resisting would not change the situation. Since that was the case, it was better to just surrender. At the same time, it could be considered as leaving a difficult problem for the Han army. As for what kind of problem it was, perhaps others could not see it, but Bugnam of Gojoseon of the Han army could definitely see it. Otherwise, he would not have been able to defeat the Golden Horde, nor would he have been able to destroy the Rossi Principality. Grand Duke, are you really willing to be tied up? Hidden in the army, Nevsky was more excited than anyone at this time. He knew that if this was the result, the chaos in the city would soon end and the victory would be decided. But if he did not surrender with the support that the blind Grand Duke had gathered over the years, who knew how long it would take to win and what kind of price he would have to pay? Seeing that it was Nevsky's voice, how could the blind Grand Duke not guess that this person was one of the instigators? However, he did not have any hatred at this time. Such a small character would not be in his eyes. He still had a very calm expression as he replied, "That's right. As long as the three generals can swear not to touch the thousands of guards in my palace, this Grand Duke will let you do whatever you want. What can you do?" In the palace, the 5,000 soldiers that Ivan had brought were basically all dead. As for the remaining 45,000 soldiers, they were blocked outside the palace by the three generals. Now there were only 5,000 palace guards left in the palace. It was because of the limited power around him that the blind Grand Duke made this decision after weighing the pros and cons. It was naturally a good thing to be able to subdue the enemy without fighting. If they didn't fight, they couldn't guarantee that they would win. After all, anything could happen as time passed. After Peter and the other two generals looked at each other, they nodded and made a solemn oath in front of the entire army. The general idea was that as long as the blind Grand Duke surrendered and the guards did not resist, they could spare the lives of these people. Of course, the oath made in front of so many people was valid. If anyone violated it, they would be hated by both humans and gods. The blind Grand Duke was very satisfied with this result. He immediately walked out of the palace and came to Peter and the other two generals. Seeing the Grand Duke of Blindness striding over and looking at them with his extremely low vision, Boris and Sergei lowered their heads at the same time. Even Peter, who was very mighty just now, turned his head to the side, not daring to look directly at the Grand Duke. In the end, Nevsky took the initiative to stand up and ordered the guards around him to subdue the blind Grand Duke. With the fall of the palace, the overall situation was set. After finishing the important matter, Nevsky sent people out of the city overnight. At dawn, they reported the news to the Han army camp outside the city and to Yang Chendong, who had just woken up. "There's a result so soon?" Yang Chendong asked in surprise. In his eyes, whether it was the blind Grand Duke or the future Ivan the Great, They were all famous figures in the history of the Ross kingdom. How could such people be so easy to deal with? Even if someone said that this civil war would last for 10 days, half a month, or even longer, he would believe it. Chapter 1480. Yes, the messenger sent by Nevsky said that the blind Grand Duke took the initiative to be captured, and the palace was also captured. Now the entire city of Moscow is waiting for our army to take over. Only young Master Yi Fan managed to escape, but he will still be in the city. They will definitely be able to find him. Young Heir added from the side. The blind Grand Duke took the initiative to be captured? No wonder. But did Ivan escape? This must be the work of the blind Grand Duke. Yang Qindong smiled after listening. That's right. If someone said that a general in the Nevsky army could take down the blind Grand Duke and his son, then he wouldn't believe it. Young master, what should we do next? Beta Persei had long been accustomed to Yang Qindong talking to himself, and he had long dispelled his curiosity. What he wanted to ask now was what to do next. What else can we do? As long as Ivan is still in the city, we are not afraid of not being able to find him. Pass down my orders. The siege cannot be stopped. No one is to be allowed to leave without permission. Also reply to the messenger. Tell him to inform Nevsky that he has done a good job. This king will also fulfill his promise. Now all he needs to do is to send people to fill up the big holes outside Moscow to ensure that our cavalry can enter the city smoothly. Since you were the ones who dug the hole, you should be the ones to fill it up. Yang Qindong wouldn't let his soldiers spend so much effort. He also used this time to think about what to do next. To be honest, whether it was dealing with the Golden Horde or the Ross principalities, things went smoothly beyond his imagination. Yang Qindong was confident about the final victory, but to be able to solve the problem so quickly, this was the important role of the three basic factors. First, the 5-star army has the most powerful weapons in the world, whether it is the power of the flintlock, the fierceness of the artillery, or the hot air balloons. They are far beyond the products of this era, and therefore can achieve the role of destroying the enemy on the battlefield. Secondly, there were many veterans in the 5-star army. They had been on the battlefield and were not afraid of death. The benefits of military merit were generous. Under such good conditions, they could even display their own strength. This ensured that the soldiers in the army were always very high-spirited, achieving the goal of being invincible and invincible. Let's put it this way, if a group of 500 elite veterans fought against a group of 5,000 new recruits, then the victor would definitely be the veterans with fewer people. It was only because they didn't have stage fright. They knew how to protect themselves while effectively attacking their opponents on the battlefield. As long as the general's orders and direction were correct, they would be able to play to their advantage. On the other hand, if it was a group of new recruits on the battlefield, it was very likely that they would fall into disarray. When they saw blood and death, they would not be able to adapt and would forget everything. Even if the opponent's butcher's knife was in front of them, they would not know how to block it. Looking at the 5-star army along the way, they had fought countless battles. There was no need to doubt the combat power of such an army. It was easy to predict which side the scales of victory would lean towards. The third point was the corruption and disunity of the Golden Horde and the Rossi principalities. Everyone had their own thoughts and could not be united. If they won the battle, then it would be fine as long as they followed the prescribed order. However, once they encountered a setback, the drawbacks of these problems would be revealed. In the end, there would be internal strife which would give the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. Looking at these two major battles, didn't the Rossi principalities only get destroyed because of internal strife? Thinking of this, Yang Qindong also began to reflect. Would this problem fall on the 5-star army? The answer was very likely. Now that Yang Qindong had great power and prestige, some things would naturally not happen with his existence. However, no one could guarantee what would happen after he was gone. Men die, birds die in the sky. Yang Qindong's thoughts only drifted for a moment before he retracted them. It was very tiring to live alone, so there was no need to think so far ahead. Anyway, after the world was unified, even if something really happened, it would be the meat in the pot. It would just be the Han people replacing the Han people, so it was not a pity. Yang Qindong's order was passed back to Moscow. After a discussion with the three generals, Nevsky began to arrange for people to go out of the city to fill in the holes. At the same time, the biggest civil strife since the establishment of Moscow took place. In the name of looking for Ivan, the army began to loot the city. This was originally a promise made by the generals to make the soldiers work for them. Now that it was done, it was time to fulfill the promise. The city of Moscow was plunged into its darkest hour. Countless nobles attached to the blind Grand Duke became the targets of looting. If they dared to resist, the soldiers who rushed into the courtyard dared to kill them. For 10 days the city was filled with smoke and fire, and corpses were everywhere. According to the statistics, at least 70% of the nobles in the city were impoverished in just 10 days. 10 days later, the holes outside the city were filled, and the cavalry of the 5-star army began to enter the city. As the vanguard, the new Second Army was the first to enter the city and disarmed all the White Russian soldiers. But just as they said, when the cavalry entered the city, they didn't do anything excessive to the surrendered soldiers and civilians. As long as they cooperated with them, their safety was guaranteed. Of course, there were those who obeyed and those who did not. For example, there were some soldiers loyal to the blind Grand Duke hidden among the civilians who jumped out to kill the cavalry of the new Second Army. But since they were already prepared, their appearance was nothing more than suicide. Before entering the city, Yang Qindong had already given orders. Although Moscow had fallen, there were still many opposing forces in the city. So unless everyone in the city was evacuated, the danger would not be eliminated. Killing intent could appear at any time and fighting could happen again at any time. With Yang Qindong's orders, how could the cavalry of the new Second Army not be careful? In addition, with the armor on their bodies, ordinary swords, spears and arrows could not hurt them unless they were at close range. This caused the opposing forces in the city to suffer heavy casualties in the end. Originally, Pyotr and the other generals were dissatisfied with the disarming of the Han army as soon as they entered the city, but after seeing the waves of assassinations on the streets, they immediately shut their mouths. Anyone who raised any objections at this time might be mistaken as an accomplice of the assassins. That would be a big problem. In the following 3 days, the cavalry of the new Second Army killed no less than 3,000 people in the city. Only then did the public security situation become much more stable. But even so, Pyotr was clear that there were still many people in the city who opposed the Han army. It was just that the timing was not right and they did not reveal themselves. However, the 3 days were up and it was time for Yang Qindong to lead the army into the city. After all, if the time dragged on for too long, it would give people the impression that the Han Bugnam of Gojosian was afraid of death. If that was the case, it would only help the enemy's morale in flames. Compared to the Golden Horde, the Rossi dukedom's emotions were much higher. Under the indoctrination of the Grand Duke of Blindness, many White Russians had established themselves with the slogan that the world was vast, and White Russians were the most respected. In their eyes, they were the strongest people in the world. They should rule the world and not be ruled by others. Under the extreme nationalism, the public security in the city was worrying. However, since Yang Qindong had said that he would enter the city in 3 days, there was no reason for him not to enter the city when the time came. Outside the east gate of Moscow, 3 days later in the morning, Yang Qindong rode a white dragon and entered the city under the protection of 2,000 black-clothed and black-armored black cavalry dragon guards. Yang Qindong, who already had the strength of a grandmaster, admitted that unless it was a cannon, it would be extremely unrealistic for others to want to keep him here. Even so, as long as he was prepared, he could move into the warehouse at any time. This was truly a self-preservation weapon. With this kind of capital, even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would still dare to charge in. Not to mention, Moscow was currently filled with the new Second Army's 5-star army cavalry. What was there to fear? At the city gate, Nevsky, Pyotr, Boris, and Sergei were already waiting in a welcoming formation. When Yang Qindong appeared here, they were still some distance away. However, these people all knelt on the ground. Some of them didn't even dare to raise their heads, let alone move to show their sincerity. Now they were at the mercy of Yang Qindong. Even if Yang Qindong changed his mind and wanted to kill them all, these people would have no power to resist. Since that was the case, there was no other way other than to willingly submit to him. Get up. Riding a white dragon, Yang Qindong appeared in front of a group of Russian officials and spoke in Russian. It was important to clarify that the current white dragon was no longer the white dragon of the past, but the descendant of the white dragon. After all, there was a limit to the lifespan of a healthy horse. Although the old white dragon was not dead yet, it was not as fast as it used to be. Fortunately, after conquering so many places and conquering so many territories, the white dragon had already found a suitable mate for the next generation of white dragons, which was already ready for service. But without exception, the owner of the white dragon could only be Yang Qindong. No one else had the authority to ride on them. The high and mighty Yang Qindong greeted the group of Russian officials in Russian. Only then did these people who were kneeling on the ground stand up in trepidation. "Come, give me a horse and we will tour the city together," Yang Qindong said to Beta Persei and the others in Mandarin with a smile on his face. Being able to ride a horse with Bugnam of Gojosian was a very glorious thing. At least that was what the generals of the 5-star army thought. And now, this treatment was given to these surrendered officials, which made many people envious. Chapter 1481. Naturally, Yang Qindong's actions were to appease the people and tell them that he would not kill the surrendered generals. Secondly, it was to make these people the target of public criticism and make it impossible for them to betray him. After all, in the eyes of some opponents, the closer these nobles and ministers were to the Han people, the more unforgivable their crimes were. Perhaps some people in the crowd understood this and their faces became ugly. However, for those who were determined to surrender like Nevsky, they did not think so much. Hearing the treatment given by Yang Qindong, they all got on the horse happily, their faces full of excitement. With someone taking the lead, even if the others were unwilling, they could only choose to get on their horses. After all, compared to angering those staunch nationalists, Bugnam of Gojosian in front of them was not to be trifled with. He could kill them at any time. Everyone got on their horses and Yang Qindong began patrolling the city with these people. Xia Bei, who had already been instructed, had already planned the route. On the wide road in the city, there were fully armed new Second Army cavalry soldiers on both sides of the road. They were responsible for the security of the periphery. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers were protecting Yang Qindong, and were responsible for the safety of close quarters. Under such a formation, unless it was an attack from cannons, even a group of soldiers with guns could not threaten Yang Qindong's safety. Even so, along the way they still encountered a total of 13 attempts to assassinate them, big and small. Some of them were killed by the new Second Army cavalry as soon as they appeared. Some of them relied on their numbers to break through the periphery, but the black cavalry soldiers drew their swords and mercilessly attacked, killing the white Russian soldiers on the streets. By the time they finished patrolling and arrived in front of the palace, many of the black cavalry soldiers' armors were covered in blood. Regarding this, the black cavalry soldiers acted as if they did not hear anything. Perhaps they were used to such scenes and were not moved at all. They were still standing upright on their horses. When Nevsky and the other nobles saw this scene, their bodies trembled and they looked at Yang Qindong with reverence. In the eyes of Pyotr and the other generals, who were used to seeing blood, they were also amazed by the strength of the black cavalry. They had observed very carefully just now. When the black cavalry soldiers killed people, they did not even blink and their arms did not tremble at all. It felt like they had done this countless times and were already numb to it. Facing such an army, even without flying balls or black oil, the generals could not help but ask themselves if they could stop them. The result would be the same. During the patrolling the city, more than 1,000 white Russians were killed. Only then did Yang Qindong was satisfied and entered the palace to listen to the reports below. The white, the black and black cavalry soldiers of course, and the white Russian soldiers, the black cavalry and the black cavalry soldiers. However, all the good things in the palace added up to 40 million silver taels. Of course, this did not mean that the white Russians were poor. In fact, a lot of the wealth was in the hands of the nobles. She had done a rough investigation. If the nobles could only leave with 10% of their wealth, they would have to hand over more than 200 million taels of wealth. From this, it could be seen that they were still very rich. After 2 big battles, Yang Qindong was very satisfied with the harvest he had gained. Especially in the battle against Moscow, he had only sent out 2 flying balls and dropped some black oil. His side had not suffered any losses, and yet he had gained so much. Seemed like it was really worth it. In his joy, Yang Qindong looked at Shibi and said, "Apart from taking out a portion of the spoils for the army to continue expanding, the rest will be split equally between you and Crimson City to develop this place." Hearing that he could keep half of the spoils, Shibi was naturally overjoyed. Yang Qindong had told him about the establishment of the new Second Army. Now that he had so much wealth to support him, if he did not do well, he might as well go home and be a farmer. Xibi was very happy. Yang Qindong also made a request. He wanted this place to undergo a small change every year and a big change every 3 years. He wanted to make use of the vast land here to become Xianxia's granary. Not only that, but there were also many forests and rich minerals. This place would also become Xianxia's heavy industrial zone. In the future, some of the heavy industrial factories in Crimson City would move here. As the owner of this place, Xibi had to be ready to welcome and cooperate. In order to let Xibi do his work better, Yang Qindong not only gave him the position of commander of the new Second Army, he also gave him the position of governor of the Eastern European province. Yes, the land where the Rossi Principalities and the Golden Horde were located was merged into a new province called the Eastern European province. In comparison, the area it occupied was far larger than any of the provinces under Xianxia's control. Giving such an important position to Xibi showed how much importance he attached to this place. Xibi knelt down on the spot to express her gratitude. At the same time, she promised that she would do her best to live up to Yang Qindong's kindness of recognizing her and promoting her. Yang Qindong did not doubt Xibi's loyalty. If Xibi had other thoughts, she would have surrendered when she was surrounded by the Baiming army. Xibi only trusted Xibi. If Xibi gave her too much power, there would be accidents. Yang Qindong proposed that officials from Crimson City and other provinces would be sent to cooperate with Xibi. Not only that, but the position of governor of the Eastern European province would also have to be given to Xibi. A person could be a political and military leader during special times, but it would not last long. In this regard, Xibi naturally agreed. If Xibi was allowed to continue working, why would he worry? It was not a good thing for a person to have too much power. Xibi did not want to live in fear every day. After Xibi's other matters were settled, Yang Qindong held a meeting with Nikovsky and the others. Yang Qindong took out all the regions except Crimson City for everyone to choose. According to Yang Qindong, these people could not stay in the Eastern European province. Otherwise he would not be at ease. These people would also live very carefully. It would be better for them to move out and choose a new place to live. They would face an unfamiliar environment there. They would not be able to find their people there. They would not even be able to find people who could speak Russian. They could only communicate in Chinese. In the end, after a few years, they would gradually assimilate into the third-class Han people. Everyone was relieved that Yang Qindong had given them a way out. Not to mention, Yang Qindong had allowed them to take away 1/10 of their current wealth. With money, they wouldn't have a bad life anywhere. At that moment, everyone began to choose a new place to live in. Fortunately, Xianxia's territory was large enough for everyone to choose. They would not have a chance to meet again. During this time, Pyotr, Sergei, and several other important generals also expressed their desire to continue serving in the army. They were different from Boris. Boris was indebted to the Grand Duke of Blindness. Now that he had betrayed his old master, how could he still serve the Han people? But Pyotr and Sergei were different. They were still in their prime and wanted to make a name for themselves. Especially after seeing the strength of the Han army, they wanted to join and make a name for themselves. For this kind of request, Yang Qindong did not hesitate to refuse. The reason why he used the generals of the Golden Horde was that they had been leading cavalry for many years and were truly valiant generals. Secondly, they were uncultured and thought that whoever fed them was the master. Of course, they would be easy to control. But the generals of the Russian Empire were different. They were influenced by the Grand Duke of Blindness and knew right from wrong. People with ideas like these were dangerous existences who could be stabbed in the back at any time. Not to mention, these generals were used to commanding firearms. In Xianxia, the main force of firearms was the Cold Front. How could such an elite be led by someone from a different race? After Yang Qindong rejected them without hesitation, Pyotr, Sergei, and the others could only suppress this idea. Fortunately, they had looted a lot of good things in the city over the past 10 days. Even if they only kept 1/10 of what they had, the rest was still a shocking amount of wealth. They could live well wherever they went. After making arrangements for the higher-ups of the Russian Empire, the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was detained in the prison, was brought out and sent to the main hall that he used to lead. The difference was that he was no longer the master of the main hall. Instead, he was a prisoner. Considering that the Grand Duke of Blindness had poor eyesight, Yang Qindong deliberately arranged for him to sit 2 steps in front of him. The old man and the young man looked at each other, sizing each other up. In his previous life, Yang Qindong had dealt with a lot of Russians. Most of them were fond of wine, greedy and terrifyingly arrogant. Although the country's economy was not doing well, the weapons they produced were even feared by developed countries. In the common words of the common people, they were a fighting nation. Yang Qindong made the first move, taking advantage of the fact that the other party had yet to gain momentum to destroy them. He effectively suppressed the other party's development and also trampled on the other party's arrogant mentality, making it worthless. Now that he was the victor, Yang Qindong did not stop him from observing the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was a very important figure in Russian history. The Grand Duke of Blindness was also sizing up Yang Qindong. Although his eyesight was very limited, he was relying on his conscience. After a few observations, he could not help but sigh. This Han man, who was more than 20 years younger than him, gave him a feeling of invincibility. Chapter 1482. Such a person would not make people feel threatened by his every move and would even make people want to get close to him. However, when one developed a hostile heart, one would realize that the other party had no flaws. His many years of experience told him that such an opponent was the most terrifying. Young man, you have won, but I don't know how to deal with the Rossi people. Oh, and what about the 5,000 palace guards who are absolutely loyal to me? Yang Qindong, who could not find the other party's flaws and whose breathing was very stable, made the Grand Duke of Blindness unable to find a way to break through. Thus he simply took the initiative to attack. He also wanted to see how this Han Chinese man would deal with the affairs of the Rossi principalities. Over the years, if there were two things that the Grand Duke of Blindness was most proud of, they would be having such a capable son like Ivan and the fact that he had changed the mentality of the majority of the Rossi people, enlightening them and giving them a strong sense of belonging to their nation. Such people were the least likely to be influenced by others and the least likely to accept the leadership of a foreign race. If things went wrong, they would be in trouble and might even rise again and repeat their glory. It was precisely because of his confidence in these people that the Grand Duke of Blindness asked this question. At the same time, he was also making things difficult for Yang Qindong. In an instant, the Grand Duke of Blindness raised two difficult questions. When Yang Qindong heard this, he was not the slightest bit displeased. On the contrary, he chuckled. What's wrong? Are these two things very difficult for you? Aren't they difficult? The Grand Duke of Blindness was somewhat disturbed by Yang Qindong's smile, but he really could not think of any way to solve the problem, so he still firmly believed that the other party was just being stubborn. He was probably having a headache now. Was it difficult? In Yang Qindong's eyes, it was really not a big deal. It was still the same sentence. The land of Eastern Europe would not be the first territory that Xianxia conquered, nor would it be the last. This territory should be managed in the same way as the territory they conquered before. Therefore, Yang Qindong simply smiled at the blind duke's question as if two old friends were chatting. With a pleasant countenance, he casually recounted how he conquered other places, moved the people away from their original places, and finally achieved great harmony. Even though Yang Qindong only gave a rough explanation, it still took him half an hour. After finishing his explanation, Yang Qindong quickly took a big gulp of tea to moisten his throat. Then he looked at the Grand Duke of Blindness with a smug look like a child who wanted to be praised by an adult for doing the right thing. For some reason, when facing the Grand Duke of Blindness, the other party gave him this feeling. He could relax and say what he wanted to say. On the other hand, the Grand Duke of Blindness had an ugly expression on his face. Previously, he thought that the Russian people had been partially liberated under his rule. With such people, it would be difficult for anyone to rule them except for the Russian leader. However, he never expected that the young Han Bugnam of Gojoseon would think of such a method to migrate and divide the people. The method was so simple and undeniably effective that it could only make the Grand Duke of Blindness dumbfounded. At the same time, he also knew very well that if what had just been said was true, the strength of the so-called Russian ancestors would be greatly reduced. Next, they would inevitably be divided and ruled together. Finally, they would be annihilated in the wheel of history. He was shocked by Xianxia's strength in his heart. Without such a large territory, it was impossible to do this. Moreover, the money needed to be spent was also incalculable. It would be difficult for any emperor to make such a choice because it required countless investments in the early stages in exchange for long-term stability in the future. However, these problems were no longer problems in the eyes of this young man. He had already used countless facts to prove that this path could be taken, and the returns would not be too low. The Grand Duke of Blindness couldn't help but praise the other party in his heart. He was thinking how good it would be if the person who did this was a descendant of the Russian clan. If there was such a talent, he was willing to give all his efforts to help the other party. However, now it seemed that the rulers of the world in the future would only be the Han people, and they could only be the Han people. Any powerful ethnic group would be inferior in front of the Han people and would need to look up to them. While the Grand Duke of Blindness was amazed by this big move, he suddenly thought of something. His expression changed and he said, "What about my 5,000 palace guards? How are you going to deal with them? Kill them?" "As you wish, of course I will kill them all. Not only them but many people in the city who are unwilling to migrate or young adult men who show a little resistance will also die. You know, they are not a small force of opposition. If I don't deal with them, I'm afraid that during the migration process, these people will not be obedient and will create a lot of difficulties for my army. I don't want them to hurt my soldiers and the good people in the future because of a moment of kindness," Yang Qindong said with a matter-of-fact look, and then looked at the Grand Duke of Blindness, as if he would do the same if he were in the Grand Duke's shoes. The Grand Duke of Blindness sighed. At this time he finally understood why the Han King in front of him was able to achieve such great achievements at such a young age. Naturally, he was a master who killed decisively. It was a pity that they had underestimated such a powerful opponent. If they had known this earlier, they would have put down all their prejudices and joined forces with the Golden Horde. That way, even if they were defeated, it would have taken a long time. If they were careful, it was not impossible to turn defeat into victory in the process. But everything was already history and could no longer be changed. The Grand Duke of Blindness closed his mouth tightly with an expression that said, "You're amazing, I admit defeat and you'll kill me quickly." "What? Do you want to die?" Seeing the faint death intent from the Grand Duke of Blindness, Yang Qindong asked with a grin. "Yes." The Grand Duke of Blindness nodded honestly. "I'm old and I've done what I should, but I still can't change the result. Now I can only die to thank the world." "You're afraid of being used by me, such as using you to lure young Master Yi Fan out." Yang Qindong did not believe that and just pointed out the other's inner thoughts. At this moment, the dying old man suddenly seemed to have recovered his youth, and the momentum of his whole body changed. When he looked at Yang Qindong, his eyes were full of killing intent. Obviously, this sentence had touched the dragon's reverse scale. "What? Did I say what's in your heart, or do you want to beg me to spare your son's life?" Yang Qindong continued to chuckle. "What do you want?" The Grand Duke of Blindness, whose aura had soared, only maintained it for less than 2 breaths before returning to the appearance of an amiable old man. Clearly he was now in an absolute disadvantage. Even the change in aura just now could not be maintained for long. "What else can I do? Of course I have to eliminate the roots. To be honest, I never underestimate any opponent, especially the successor personally cultivated by you, the Grand Duke of Blindness. It's absolutely impossible to not find Yi Fan. You can rest assured that he will definitely be found. As I said before, I will migrate the entire city, including all the dignitaries and civilians. At that time, I will find some people who have seen young Master Yi Fan and let them recognize him one by one. I think he won't be able to fly out even if he has wings. Am I right, Grand Duke of Blindness?" Looking at Yang Qindong as if he was talking about a very ordinary thing, the Grand Duke of Blindness sat down on the chair. He finally admitted in his heart that this Yang Qindong was a devil who opened his bloody mouth and could devour all enemies and opponents. If he really migrated the people in the city one by one like a sieve, Yi Fan, who was hiding in the city, really couldn't escape. At that time he naturally couldn't avoid the risk of being wiped out. In that case he wouldn't be able to die in peace. "What do you want? What are you going to do? What do you want me to do?" Finally getting to the point, Yang Qindong laughed. "It's very simple. I need your cooperation. I need you to help me find him. As for the conditions, you can try to mention it, but I can't guarantee that I will agree to it. I'm going to find my son and give him to you. You're not joking, right?" Laughing out loud, the Grand Duke of Blindness changed his indifferent demeanor from before. Yang Qindong didn't laugh this time. Instead, his expression was incomparably serious. He stared at the Grand Duke of Blindness' face. He wanted the other party to know that he was serious and didn't have the slightest intention of joking. Sure enough, under such a gaze, the Grand Duke of Blindness gradually stopped laughing. When he looked at Yang Chendong, his expression slowly became serious until he finally lowered his head. He was weighing the pros and cons of the matter in his heart. If he didn't help the other party would just spend more time and energy. At that time, his son wouldn't be able to escape either. On the contrary, if he cooperated, he might be able to fight for a way out for his son in the future. After so many years of observation, he knew better than anyone how powerful his son was. It would only take a certain amount of time for his son to grow into an eagle that could spread its wings and soar. Then he would be able to achieve great things. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry. This time he met the Grand Duke of Blindness in addition to admiring the demeanor of this historical figure. He also came to persuade the other party to cooperate with his work. As he said earlier, he could indeed release the Rossi people one by one out of the city. In the end, he believed that Ivan wouldn't be able to escape. This was because he believed that not only him, but there were also many people who wanted to capture Ivan to relieve their worries, such as Nevsky and Peter. But it was undeniable that doing so would be a big project. It was just for one person, yet he had to pay such a huge price and time. If Yang Chendong didn't know Ivan's future achievements, he wouldn't have chosen this method. Chapter 1483. But if the Grand Duke of Blindness was willing to cooperate, it would be completely different. Nobody knew a son better than his father. With this person's help, it would be extremely easy to find Ivan. In this way, it would save a lot of time. Of course, it was normal to pay some price for this. Everything depended on what the other party asked for. The Grand Duke of Blindness sat there in silence for a long time, weighing the gains and losses in his heart. In the end, he sighed and said, "In that case, I have 3 conditions." Try to say it. Yang Chendong did not arrogantly say that he would agree even if the Grand Duke of Blindness had 100 conditions. He also answered very cautiously. It was enough to prove that he was very cautious when facing an opponent at the level of the Grand Duke of Blindness. First, please keep the name of Moscow. Please also leave some people who are not a threat in your eyes. After all, this is the place where the Ross clan lived. We still need them to stay as witnesses. At least we won't let them disappear from this land so quickly and prove that the Ross clan was once the owner of this place. After the Grand Duke of Blindness finished speaking, he looked expectantly at Yang Chendong's reaction. In this regard, Yang Chendong just urged, "There are 2 more conditions. Say them together." Second, I can help you find Ivan, but you have to promise not to hurt him and you have to swear a heavy oath. Also, you can't kill the 5,000 palace guards. You can give them to Ivan to lead. I will persuade him to become a foreign division in your Han army. Presumably, you still have a lot of places to fight and occupy, so you will always need manpower. Since you are so optimistic about Ivan's strength, presumably his addition will make you like a tiger that has grown wings, right? Third, I want the heads of Nikev and Peter. They betrayed us, so they must pay the price. As long as Bugnam of Gojozian can agree, I will do my best to help you. I will even come forward to appease the hearts of the people in the city. You know, these people have feelings for this Grand Duke. Many of them are still willing to believe me. The 3 conditions were stated by the Grand Duke of Blindness. Next, it was time to wait for Yang Chendong's reply. In this regard, Yang Chendong, who was smiling, had a mocking look in his eyes. She had already become a prisoner, so how could she still make such an outrageous request? Was it because the other party was used to being domineering, or was it because he was too gentle? He decided to let the other party know who had the final say in this place at this moment. "I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill any of your 3 conditions." While objecting, Yang Chendong continued, "It seems that some people still don't understand the situation. Do you really think that we can't find Ivan without your help?" The more he spoke, the colder Yang Chendong's expression became. "Men, bring those 5,000 palace guards to the square and kill them all." "Yes, young master." Yang Heir, who had been waiting at the side for a long time, was waiting for these words. He agreed and turned around to leave. The blind duke was forced to panic. Wait a minute. He didn't expect Yang Chendong to be so decisive. Since it was a negotiation, of course one side would offer a sky-high price, and the other side would pay back the money. How could one flip the table just because one side disagreed? If that was the case, how could the game not continue? Of course, through this test he could also see that Yang Qindong was not the nobles he had come into contact with before. This was a very principled and powerful person. He would not tolerate the slightest doubt or criticism from others. The Grand Duke of Blindness shouted for Yang Qindong to stop. He lowered his head and asked Yang Qindong to propose amendments. And this was exactly what he wanted. His performance just now was just to intimidate the Blind Duke. Reality also proved that a paper tiger was a paper tiger. As expected, he was not intimidated. Alright, since that's the case, this king will propose the final regulations. When he said final, it meant that the following words could not be questioned or refuted. If the Blind Duke still did not agree, then there was nothing to talk about. First, all the people in the city must be evacuated. Not a single one is left. This is unquestionable. Not even the slightest trace of your people can be left here. Second, as long as Ivan performs well, he can be spared and be given a chance to redeem himself. But he will always be watched. Once he is found to be disloyal, he will be beheaded without mercy. On the other hand, if he is willing to work honestly, this king can guarantee that he will not be killed. As for the 5,000 guards, only 500 of them can be allocated. The other 4,500 will be sent to other armies. You should know that it is impossible for this person to have too much military power before he has enough trust. Also, as the Grand Duke, you also need to make a public speech to express your submission to us, the Han people. This is also an important reason for your son's safety. As for the third point, Nekov and the others are traitors in your eyes, but in this king's eyes they are meritorious people. It is impossible to harm them. It is best if you understand this point. Even if you don't, you have to understand. With the same unquestionable tone, Yang Qindong refuted the 3 points raised by the Blind Duke. It could even be said that this was not just a rebuttal. 2 of the 3 points had been directly rejected. Even the remaining point had been discounted, and Yang Qindong had even taken the opportunity to raise his own opinion. Normally, such an answer would not satisfy the Grand Duke of Blindness. But the other party actually quickly nodded in agreement. Good, I hope Bugnam of Gojosian can keep his promise. Otherwise, this duke will not let you go even if I die and become a ghost. My Rossi people will also disturb your peace. When he said these words, although the Blind Duke's eyes revealed an unquestionable momentum, there was a trace of craftiness in his eyes. It was clear that this answer had already satisfied him. Originally, what the Blind Duke wanted was the safety of his son. Through the conversation with Yang Qindong just now, he already knew that the Han man in front of him, Bugnam of Gojosian, had strong means, strong capital, and superb abilities that had exceeded his previous expectations. Unless this person died one day, it would be a nightmare for anyone to be his enemy, and there was no chance of winning. His son could not be this person's opponent. Since that was the case, it was better to submit to this person. There was nothing safer than this. Only by ensuring his own safety could he have the opportunity to look forward to his own grand plan. And once something happened to Yang Qindong, it would be the day when the Rossi clan rose again. The Blind Duke did not doubt what Yang Qindong said to him. Although he also knew that moving the entire city out one by one and screening them one by one was indeed a very laborious task and would take a lot of time, it was undeniable that this was indeed a good way to find Ivan. If he really could not find Ivan, he did not doubt that this young king would rather kill all the unidentified people in the city. Once he really did that, it would be unknown how many heads would fall to the ground. It would also be tantamount to completely destroying the hope of the Rossi clan's rise. In contrast, this was what he could not tolerate. As long as there was still hope, it was worth it for the Blind Duke to do anything. He seemed to be a person who was born to make the Rossi clan strong and was willing to do anything for this goal, even death. He was not even afraid of death. It was just agreeing to a few of Yang Qindong's conditions. What was the big deal? Astonishment flashed across Yang Qindong's face when the Grand Duke of Blindness agreed to the conditions so readily. Seeing this, the Grand Duke of Blindness finally revealed a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. What? Bugnam of Gojosian, don't tell me you want to go back on your word? Go back on my word? How is that possible? Yang Qindong shouted as if someone had stepped on his sore spot. He looked like he was pretending to be a tough guy. Since these words came from this king will certainly fulfill his promise. Then it's a deal. Next, I'll have to ask Bugnam of Gojosian to invite some people to be witnesses. You know, if there's no guarantee, I won't dare to trust my former enemy. You would do the same. The blind duke was happy that his plan had succeeded. Of course. Yang Qindong also looked like he was willing to accept his loss. Then he snapped his fingers and ordered someone to call over the high-ranking generals of the 5-star army in Moscow and a group of senior officials from the Rossi kingdom. He wanted to swear in front of everyone to prove that he was serious and at the same time dispel the blind duke's doubts. After doing all this, Yang Qindong seemed to be in a bad mood. It will take some time for these people to come. This king is a little tired and needs to rest now. After saying that, he turned and left without waiting for the blind duke's reaction. Beta Persei followed him. When the two walked out of the hall, Beta Persei saw that there was no one around, so he hurried to Yang Qindong's side and said, "Young master, did that old guy make you angry? So this little one will go back and kill him now. That way no one will know the content of the previous conversation." "No need." Yang Qindong replied with a smile. Where was the angry look from just now? Just as the blind duke asked for a sky-high price, why wouldn't he pay? No one knew Ivan's power better than him. If he didn't find such a person, he wouldn't even be able to sleep in peace. In contrast, it was just agreeing to some of the other party's conditions. What was the big deal? Don't forget that Yang Qindong swore that as long as Ivan didn't rebel, he wouldn't do anything to him. But the other party was originally an ambitious person. As long as the opportunity was right, how could he not rebel? Chapter 1484. What if there's no chance? Yang Qindong can create opportunities for him. I don't believe that the other party won't fall into my trap. If that's the case, I won't feel guilty at all after killing this person, and all the efforts of the blind archduke today will be in vain. It was with this idea that Yang Qindong reluctantly agreed to the other party's second request. As for deliberately pretending to be angry, it was just to confuse the blind archduke and not give the other party a chance to regret. After all, even if all the people in the city were moved out, they might not necessarily be able to find Ivan. What if the other party hid in a certain tunnel in the city and didn't go out? Could it really be possible to tear down the entire Moscow city and dig 3 feet into the ground? How much time and cost would it take? It was just for a person who didn't have the ability to pose a threat, so it was really a bit of a fuss. With their own thoughts, everyone was quickly summoned. In front of everyone, Yang Qindong made an oath in the name of King Wunan of Daimyong that as long as the blind archduke found Ivan and sent him to him, not only would he not kill this person, but he would also give this person the power to lead troops. He also promised that unless this person rebelled or made a real move, Yang Qindong would never kill this person. Violating this oath would incur the wrath of the gods. Yang Qindong made a statement in public and the blind archduke was overjoyed. In front of everyone he proposed several locations, and the well-prepared black cavalry divided into several groups to search for him. About an hour later, a stooped Ross clan man dressed in civilian clothes appeared in the hall. In the past, there were many people who pretended to be crazy in order to achieve great things. For example, Zhou Xian, who endured hardships, could even eat feces when he was crazy. Mr. Zhu Di of the Great Ming Dynasty also pretended to be crazy for a long time in order to dispel Zhu Yunwen's suspicion of him at that time. It was just that Yang Qindong had never seen those people, unlike the current Ivan who he saw with his own eyes. He didn't know what was applied on his face, but it made his skin look a lot older. There were more wrinkles on his face, showing that he was far older than his age. There was also that stooped body which didn't seem artificial at all, as if he was born like this. Coupled with that silly smile, he really looked like a mentally retarded child. There was no trace of the young and high-spirited young Master Yi Fan in his every move. He didn't seem to have the temperament that a noble should have, but Yang Qindong was still very sure that the other party was Ivan. Otherwise, the black cavalry wouldn't have brought such a person into the hall. Just as Yang Qindong was looking at this fool who the black cavalry said was sleeping in a horse barn, the blind Grand Duke, who was also standing in the hall, suddenly spoke. "My son Ivan, your father-in-law has already talked to the King Wunan of Daimyong. You won't be guilty and you still have the right to lead the troops. Now please restore your true body." As soon as these words came out of his mouth, the stooped man standing in the hall, whose eyes were originally dim, suddenly shone brightly. Then the man suddenly straightened his body like a magic trick. As he stretched out his hand, some of the disguises on his face were also removed. A spirited and handsome young man in his 20s appeared in front of everyone. How could those who knew Ivan not recognize him? Who else could he be if he wasn't the wise young Master Ivan of the Ross clan, who was predicted to appear once in a few hundred years? "I finally caught you." Yang Qindong saw everyone's reaction and revealed a victorious smile on his face. At the same time, he was also shocked. Thinking about it, if this person was really dressed like this, even if everyone in the city had to go through a sieve, they might not be able to find him. And if he let him escape, he was really worried that the new Second Army commander, Sherbet, who was left behind to guard the city, might not be able to defeat him. Ivan was finally found. Yang Qindong also fulfilled his promise and gave him the position of Chili Arch, which consisted of 500 ordinary Mongolian soldiers and 500 palace guards. Anyone could see that the 500 Mongolian soldiers were there to keep an eye on Ivan and prevent him from doing anything that would endanger the five-star army. With Ivan captured, the Rossi duchies no longer had any chance to make a comeback. Yang Qindong could finally rest assured and bid farewell to the Rossi duchies and prepare to leave. Before that, the new Second Army was also formed. Unexpectedly, the officers used were basically the same as the original members of the new Second Army. The commanders were Qiao Chao, the commander of the 104th Army, Li Jun, the commander of the 105th Army, Wu Hui, the commander of the 106th Army, Yang Chunfeng, the commander of the 107th Army, and Su Liang, the division commander of the army. The 4 division commanders were all promoted by 1 rank and became division commanders. The original division commander Su Liang was also promoted by 2 ranks and was promoted to division commander. The reason why all of them were recruited was to make it easier for Sherbet to manage them. Everyone was familiar with each other and could save a lot of time. Secondly, this place was remote and not many people were willing to come. Even if they were willing to come, it would take time. Since that was the case, it was better to put these people to good use first. As for whether they were suitable or not, time would tell. If it really didn't work out, he could just change them again. At the same time that the new Second Army was established, Yang Qindong established the Far East Army in the name of the Army Commander-in-Chief. The commander was Qin Bo, and the division commander under the army was Dai Kuo of the 108 Army, Kong He of the 109 Army, Shi Xiaolin of the 110 Army, Ma Hong of the 111 Army, and the division commander Wu Ba of the army. Similarly, the old members of the Far Eastern Army were promoted, and the division commander was promoted to division commander. In this way, it meant that there were a total of 8 armies and 2 division commanders in this area. Even if something happened, these people were enough to solve the problem and there was no need to transfer troops from outside. After giving 2 orders in a row, Yang Qindong was ready to leave Eastern Europe. Speaking of which, it had been 3 years since he led the troops into the Far Eastern region. It was much longer than the time needed to conquer any land. Fortunately, the harvest this time was big enough and the territory was enough. The slaves and gold and silver seized were also far beyond his expectations. At the end of August 1463 AD, Yang Qindong gathered a total of 400,000 troops, including the world's first cavalry army, the 3rd Cavalry Army, the Cold Front 2nd Division, a total of 100,000 troops, 100,000 Russian troops and 200,000 Mongolian troops. For the difference, the Mongolian troops were the enemy, and the Mongolian troops were the surrendered troops and were a part of the 5-star army. Setting out from the city of Moscow with the pretext of pursuing Xianxia, the leader of the Cherkass people, and Maxim, the leader of the Novgorod city-state, the troops were directed towards the Rossi principalities, and the Lithuanian state, which was located to the south of the present Eastern European province. Before this, the leader of the Alans, Maulayan Tugnev of Yatka and Vanya of Pskov were either killed by the 5-star army, or they surrendered due to their powerful strength. Only a few generals such as Xianxia and Maxim managed to escape. Even so, the number of troops they brought with them when they escaped was very limited, only 20 to 30,000 people in total. However, Yang Qindong still chased after them with the 400,000 troops, which was more or less like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. However, there was an ulterior motive. The 5-star army needed a reason to expand their territory and they also needed an excuse. At the end of the 9th month of the year 1463, the 400,000 men of the 5-star army captured the capital of Lithuania, which was trying to shelter Xianxia and the others. Lithuania was thus destroyed and became another part of the Yang faction. Unfortunately, they still couldn't find Shamask and the others. But it didn't matter, there was already news that they escaped to Poland with their troops, so they just had to continue the chase. Therefore, the Five-Star Army's 400,000 troops continued to move forward, taking down Poland, Hungary, and other small countries. They brushed past the border of the Roman Empire and entered Serbia, Bulgaria, and other small countries. Facing the aggressive Han army, these countries had no choice but to surrender, as if they were repeating the scene of the Mongol Empire many years ago. In the end, the Five-Star Army successfully took down the Byzantine Empire that surrendered and appeared behind the Ilkhanate. Right now it was already February 1464 AD. It was snowing heavily and it hindered the traffic. As a result, the Five-Star Army had no choice but to stop and rest. Relying on their military cotton coats and warm down jackets, as well as high-waisted riding boots, even in the coldest weather, the Five-Star Army soldiers rarely lost any members because of this. This was the benefit of having powerful equipment. How could an army wearing thin clothes be a match for the Five-Star Army in warm jackets? However, not everyone was a Han soldier who fought against the Empire and supported the Empire, and they had a strong sense of trust and obedience. The achievements that the Five-Star Army had achieved along the way, as well as the glory that they had created, had already spread throughout this region. If it weren't for the heavy snow, they would have stopped and killed their way here. Harsinhan of the Ilkhanate was the closest to the Five-Star Army, and he was the most nervous one. Even though the heavy snow made it hard to travel, Harsinhan still used every second he had and wandered around, trying to find more reinforcements. Finally, he managed to convince Khan Amur of the Timur Empire. Under his influence, more and more Khan came together and held a military meeting to defend against the Five-Star Army. Great Khan Amur. His name in Mongolian means peace. In fact, he wanted to be a peaceful Khan and live a peaceful life. But in reality, life rarely went as planned. Chapter 1485. The Timur Empire could be said to be in existence not inferior to the Golden Horde. Moreover, because of the lush grasslands around it, their development was rather fast. But it was precisely because of this favorable environment that ambitious people appeared one after another. The originally large Timur Empire was thus divided into several clans, like the Norman Khanate, the Ilkhanate, the Kazakh Khanate, the Crimean Khanate, and the Kazan Khanate. They were all once part of this empire. From this, one could see just how powerful the Timur Empire was. If not for the fact that it was divided, no one around it would be a match for it. These Khanates, who usually had their own agendas, were finally able to come together in the face of the powerful enemy, the Five-Star Army. Within the tent of Great Khan Amur, Saihan Khan of the Norman Khanate, Hassan Khan of the Ilkhanate, Janalbek Khan of the Kazakh Khanate, Haji Khan of the Crimean Khanate, Ulu Khan of the Kazan Khanate, as well as Yangtze and Ili of the Yusang tribes, had gathered together. King Bao lied. Thanks to the heavy snow, these leaders who had been nervous about the war, were able to gather together and discuss important matters. From this, one could see just how much pressure the Five-Star Army from the Byzantine Empire was exerting on them. Fortunately, none of them had been idle in this period of time. They had been constantly clashing with the Five-Star Army from the east, so they were already used to the rhythm of war. They weren't that afraid, and after such a long period of war, they were no longer as fearful of cannons as before. But this didn't mean that they weren't afraid of the Five-Star Army. On the contrary, when they learned that the commander of the Five-Star Army behind them was King Wunan of Daimyong, every member of the conference became extremely cautious. They had heard far too much about this Yang Chendong. Just the titles he had given him were numerous. For example, the most basic title of King Wunan of Daimyong, the title of Heavenly Khan given to them by the grassland, and titles like God of War and God of War. No matter which one it was harsh to the ears, especially the title of Heavenly Khan. In many people's hearts, only their ancestor Genghis Khan could use this title, but now it was used by a Han. This was equivalent to a loud slap to their faces, causing them to blush. But even though they knew this, there was nothing they could do. Facing the Five-Star Army from the east, they could only fight to a draw at most. This was because they had a vast space and complex terrain, which allowed the cavalry to unleash their greatest advantage and suppress the less mobile cannons. This time, facing the Five-Star Army from the west, one could imagine what their chances of victory were. Are you really Han Chinese? Is that really the King Wunan of Daimyong? Among the crowd, the Kazakh Kaganate's Khan Janirbek said with an angry face. It was no wonder that he would think this way. In the past, when they faced Han Chinese, if they could win, they would take advantage of them and plunder them. If they couldn't win, they would run away. At most, they would write a letter and acknowledge the other party as their master. After a period of time, when they had recovered enough strength, they would be able to launch another expedition. But as a Han Chinese, this Bugnam of Zhou Xian did not accept this at all. Wherever he attacked, it would become the territory of the other party. This person would also ferociously move the locals away and make some people who did not belong here live here. This was equivalent to completely erasing everything that once existed here. This was equivalent to cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. They did not accept surrender, nor did they accept the exchange of benefits. Regarding this point, Janirbek Khan could be said to have experienced it personally. His younger brother Kalai was unfortunately captured by the 5-star army. For this matter, he had communicated with the other party many times. He had taken money and wanted to lower his head and acknowledge the other party as his master, but he only wanted to save his brother and not start a war. He wanted peace. Unfortunately, the other party did not accept this at all. The emissary he sent was sent back, but the money he brought was left behind. If they were bandits, then the 5-star army were bandits who specialized in robbing bandits. It was really hateful, but there was nothing they could do. This was not consistent with the actions of the Han Chinese. Yang Qindong's actions naturally caused Janirbek Khan to question whether the other party was a Han Chinese. And when he said this, at least a few people in the tent showed an expression of agreement. Obviously, they also had the same thoughts. Enough. Seeing that the topic of the meeting was going astray, Amor finally spoke up. With a very serious tone, he said, "Now is not the time to talk about this. Let's think about how to deal with them. We have already received reports that the Golden Horde in the north has been destroyed by this King Wunan of Damyang. Not only that, the Ross Principality, which was the enemy of the Golden Horde, was also destroyed. Those two forces were not inferior to us in the slightest. In just 2 years they were destroyed. If we can't think of a better way, I'm afraid that this will be the lesson for us." The solemn voice caused the tent to quiet down once again. Although they were of the same branch, their ideas and thoughts were different. This made them look down on the self-proclaimed Orthodox Golden Horde from the bottom of their hearts. But this did not mean that they would underestimate the other party's strength. In Amor's words, the other party's strength was not inferior to theirs. But such a powerful Golden Horde was destroyed just like that. It was said that the old Khan Mahama was killed on the spot, and the new Khan Bora was captured alive by the 5-star army. He was beheaded on the spot in New Salai City. This kind of method made their hair stand on end when they heard it. This was an existence that was even more ferocious than them. Having such a person as an enemy really made them panic at all times. Seeing that everyone was silent, Amor spoke again. "Do you know why the Golden Horde was defeated? There were 2 reasons. One was that they underestimated the enemy, and the other was that they were not united. Facing such a powerful enemy, they did not take it seriously and were destroyed in the end. Of course, the reason why they were defeated so quickly was largely due to the desertion of the Cherkas and Allans. Since that is the case, I hope that everyone can change these 2 problems. We cannot underestimate the enemy and we must be united. Yes, for the final victory we must be united. I, Harson, am the first to swear to the longevity heaven that in the coming battle, I will not be selfish. I will fight for the sake of defeating the 5-star army." Harson Khan of the Ilkhanate was the first to express his attitude. He had no choice. The 5-star army was the closest to his territory. If they attacked, the first one to be attacked would be him. Therefore he had high hopes for today's joint meeting. The result of this meeting would determine whether the Ilkhanate would continue to exist in the future. After Harson expressed his attitude, everyone looked at each other. Finally, one by one they stood up and expressed their attitude. For their own survival, for the continuation of their race, they would give up their prejudice and personal conflicts and unite to fight against the 5-star army. Very good. Seeing that everyone had expressed their stance, Amor revealed a knowing smile on his face. Since everyone can see the seriousness of the matter, and also expressed that we will advance and retreat together, then let's discuss. Facing the 5-star army in the west, facing the aggressive Han army, I hope that everyone will do their best. Good, I agree. My Ilkhanate is willing to provide 70,000 cavalry. It was Harsan who was the first to express his support. Obviously, in order to survive, he was willing to put in a lot of effort and had a very positive attitude. Previously, when the 5-star army was fiercely attacking Ili, Harsan Khan had only sent 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, he had complained about how poor they were. The general idea was that the Ilkhanate did not have many cavalry. However, now that danger was approaching, he was willing to take out 70,000 cavalry. This was enough to prove that he had been hiding his own selfish motives. Good, since it's like this, my Timur Empire is willing to provide 50,000 cavalry. A good start made Amur Khan smile. They were willing to send 50,000 cavalry. As the most powerful and the head of the Khanates, the Timur Empire had already sent 50,000 cavalry to deal with the 5-star army from the east. Now it was sending another 50,000 cavalry to the west. From this, it could be seen that this person had a good view of the overall situation and knew how to treat everyone equally. With Harsan and Amur Khan taking the lead, the other Khanates had no choice but to send soldiers to help. Among them, the Norman Empire sent 50,000, the Kazan Khanate sent 50,000, the Crimean Khanate sent 30,000, the Kazakh Khanate and Yusang sent 20,000, and the Ili Khanate sent 10,000, making a total of 300,000. In an instant they had gathered 300,000 soldiers. Harsan's face was filled with smiles. It seemed that it was not impossible for them to fight against the 5-star army. As long as they could deal a heavy blow to their opponent, they would have a chance to negotiate. At that time he would be willing to pay tribute every year and call the other party his suzerain. Presumably they would have a chance to escape this disaster. Yes, Harsan had never thought about defeating the 5-star army. He only wanted to fight to a draw and let the other party see his strength. That was enough. After gathering 300,000 soldiers, the next step was to choose a leader. In the end, under Amur Khan's suggestion, Harsan became the leader of the army. Perhaps everyone knew that the next battle would be a matter of life and death for the Ilkhanate. Anyone could compromise, but Harsan wouldn't do so. They could rest assured that the army would be in the hands of such a person. After Harsan obtained the command of the 300,000 cavalry, he publicly declared that he would do his utmost to fight the 5-star army to the end. He wanted to use facts to tell the other party that they, the descendants of the Mongols, were not to be trifled with. He also wanted to prove to the world that they were stronger than the Golden Horde. Chapter 1486. After the meeting, the various Khanates sent their troops to the Ilkhanate one after another. Take Harsan Khan for example. After obtaining military power, the first thing he did after returning to the Khanate was not to think about where to fight the 5-star army, but to think about who to send to negotiate with the 5-star army. That's right, negotiation. Even with these 300,000 people, Harsan Khan did not think that victory would definitely belong to him. Because as long as a war broke out in his Ilkhanate, no matter who won or lost, the one who would suffer in the end would only be himself. A large number of water plants would be destroyed. How would they survive in the future? It would be best if they didn't fight. The military power he wanted was to increase his confidence in negotiating with the 5-star army. In the past he only had one Khanate, so naturally he couldn't compete with the 5-star army. But now he had 300,000 cavalry. He believed that with such strength the 5-star army should sit down and have a good talk with him. Therefore, before the 300,000 cavalry from the various Khanates were fully assembled, Yang Qindong had already received the news. What was even more ridiculous was that the person who passed the news was actually the special envoy sent by Harsan Khan, Alateng. It was him who told the enemy, the 5-star army, about his side's preparations. Peace talk, envoy? After hearing Beta Persei's report, Yang Qindong's face was full of suspicion. No wonder he would lose his composure like this. It was because his actions had already told everyone that in front of the 5-star army, there was no such thing as coexistence. Either the whole country would surrender and be occupied by us, or the whole country would be destroyed by us and be occupied by us. Countless facts had already proven this point. Logically speaking, this Ilkhanate should have known, but he still sent an envoy, which greatly exceeded Yang Qindong's expectations. But after a moment of surprise, Yang Qindong thought that this must be because Harsan Khan still had hope in his heart for peace. Since that was the case, he might as well make good use of it. In that case, arrange for Ivan to talk with them. Tell Ivan to hold back the opponent, but we still have to attack. Once the snow melts, it will be time for us to launch our attack. Yes, young master, Beta Persei replied with a smile. He could already understand Yang Chendong's intentions. Letting Ivan, who had always hated the Mongols, negotiate with the other party, presumably that envoy called Alating would not be able to gain the slightest advantage. Or rather, this person wanted to find someone to help him deal with young master. That was the time to kill him. Ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, they had been behaving normally. As his father-in-law had told him before he left, he could not perform too well. Otherwise, Bugnam of Gojoseon would pay close attention to him. However, he couldn't perform too badly. Once he lost his value, the other party could abandon him at any time. As long as he kept a low profile and bided his time, when Yang Chendong was no longer around, he would be able to soar in the sky like a bird and leap in the sea like a fish. Yifan deeply agreed with this point. He had always behaved like this. Along the way from Eastern Europe, he had destroyed several countries and forces, big and small. He did not make any important contributions, and he had never been a hindrance. No one could find any fault with what he had done. And in the past 6 months of fighting with the army, Ivan had also learned a lot. In particular, the 5-star army's military equipment was far superior to his Ross duchies, which made him envious. Sometimes he would think in his heart that if he had the same military equipment as the 5-star army, then when the two sides fought, it would be hard to say who would win and who would lose. Of course, he would suppress such thoughts deep in his heart. He was very clear that there was more than one pair of eyes staring at him in the dark. If he made any moves that were out of line, someone would immediately come and take his head. Ivan acted cautiously. Just like that, day after day he slowly adapted to the life and rhythm of the 5-star army. This made him sometimes think that he was a member of the 5-star army. After the army arrived at the border of the Ilkhanate, the army stopped advancing due to the heavy snow. They began the process of conserving their energy. Sometimes people couldn't be idle. Perhaps when they were busy, they would forget all their troubles and unhappiness. On the other hand, when they were idle, their minds would constantly wander and think about all kinds of problems. After relaxing his mind, Ivan became a little anxious. He thought about how he and Yang Chendong were only 10 years apart. When Yang Chendong grew old one day, he was afraid that he would also be very old. At that time, would he really have the energy to revive his country? To this question he didn't have a definite answer. When he thought about how he had to work for his enemy, the 5-star army, at his best age, he felt even worse. He was anxious to find an outlet to vent the unhappiness in his heart. It was at this time that the orders from above came. He was to represent the 5-star army to negotiate with the Ilkhanate's envoy and find a way to stabilize the other party. Ivan, who now had a mission, was like a completely different person. Although he had no choice but to surrender to the 5-star army, it was another way of survival that his father-in-law had planned for him. He wouldn't sincerely serve the 5-star army. However, when the opponent was the Mongols, he was very happy to do some things. For example, he had thought more than once in his heart that if it wasn't for the years of oppression from the Golden Horde, the Ross principalities would have already become independent and strong. They wouldn't have been unable to retaliate in front of the 5-star army. It could also be said that the Mongols of the Golden Horde were the main reason why the Ross principality ended up like this. Since the Ilkhanate was built by the Mongols, they were his enemy. Even if they could not find trouble with the destroyed Golden Horde, they could still take care of the Ilkhanate. That would be a very satisfying thing. Regarding this mission, Ivan gladly accepted. Soon after, he met the envoy from the Ilkhanate, Alting. This was a fat man. Compared to the skinny face of the people from the prairie, his face was white and his body was fat. It could be seen that this person's standard of living was very good. Usually, people like this were the most afraid of death and the most afraid of losing everything. This was the first time Ivan met him, and this was the definition he had given him. Alting was completely unaware. He squinted his small eyes and looked at Ivan. He didn't say anything, but he gave off a feeling of humility. This wasn't surprising. This time he was here to ask for peace. How could he be arrogant? Furthermore, the propaganda in the Ilkhanate described the 5-star army as having 3 heads and 6 arms, and that they would eat people without spitting out the bones. This caused Alting's heart to beat faster as soon as he entered the camp. He was really afraid that if he accidentally offended someone, he would be killed here. Once upon a time, The people of the Central Plains had compared the prairie people to unbearably rough existences, and unreasonable people. Now it was finally their turn to look at the Han people in this way. How could it not be that the strength of the Han people had shocked some people to their souls? Ivan unhurriedly gestured to Alting, who had entered the tent, to sit down. The other party was very careful. He smiled apologetically and thanked Ivan repeatedly before sitting down. Even so, his butt was only half on the chair. From the looks of it, he was ready to stand up at any time. His posture was no different from a subordinate seeing the fruit of upper eternity. Ivan, who saw all of this, only smiled. He didn't want to expose the other party's intentions, nor did he want to say anything to scare the other party. Because he knew that compared to raising his voice, the content of his words could really scare the other party. You are the one the Ilkhanate sent to surrender, right? No, I am here to negotiate. When he heard the word, surrender, Alting's face flushed red and at the same time he looked nervous. Negotiate? Ivan purposely frowned, then slowly raised his head and said, did we say that we want to negotiate? Of course not. But we have 300,000 cavalrymen. Before Alting could finish, Ivan's expression changed. What? Are you trying to scare the 5-star army? Or do you think you can defeat us with 300,000 cavalrymen? Are you here to flaunt your strength? Not at all, not at all. Please don't be angry, we are here to negotiate sincerely. Alting was so scared that he stood up and tried to explain himself. However, Ivan already had an impatient look on his face. After a humph, he stood up and left. Alting was left standing alone in the tent. He didn't know what to do. Why did he leave just like that? What should he do? After a long time, another person entered the tent and said to him, General Ivan is very displeased with your attitude and he is also very angry. Regarding the negotiation, let's talk about it another day. Envoy, please go back to the tent and rest. Oh, also don't walk around casually in the tent. Otherwise, if you anger someone you shouldn't, you can lose your head at any time. Thank you for the reminder. Hearing this, a layer of cold sweat appeared on Alting's forehead again, and he hurriedly nodded in response. The first meeting ended on bad terms. This was also Ivan's intention. Wasn't it just stalling for time? Of course he knew what to do. As long as Alting didn't return to the Ilkhanate, it would create a misconception that there was still a chance to negotiate. This way the other side might relax their defense, which would give the 5-star army a chance to win. Just as Ivan expected, Alting didn't return immediately. He only sent a message saying that the negotiator of the 5-star army had a bad temper, and that he still needed to communicate with them. However, it wasn't hopeless, so he asked them to wait for a while. Chapter 1487. When the message was sent back, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't want to fight, especially on his own territory. This was tantamount to destroying his strength, so even if there was a chance for peace talks, he wouldn't miss it. When he heard that there was hope for peace talks, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't send people to ask why the reinforcements sent by the other Khans hadn't arrived yet. In his opinion, it would be best if there was no war. If the reinforcements didn't arrive, he could save a lot of military provisions. 3 days later, Alting felt that Ivan's anger should have subsided a little, so he asked the 5-star army soldiers guarding outside his tent to pass on a message. He wanted to see General Ivan and continue the negotiations. In the afternoon, in the same big tent, Alting saw Ivan, who reeked of alcohol. When he saw the other party's appearance, Alting was relieved. He wasn't stupid, he was most worried that the other party would use him to lower the vigilance of the Ilkhanate and prepare for war. But now that he saw Ivan's body reeking of alcohol, he thought that the other party wasn't preparing for war but enjoying it. It seems that they don't like war. That being the case, he was confident that the peace talks would succeed. Sure enough, this time Ivan was much easier to talk to than the last time. He didn't object to the peace talks proposed by Alting. Instead, he really listened to the other party's various opinions. For example, in the future, King Wunan of Daemyong will be honored as the king, annual tribute, as well as how much money will be sent. In the end, when it was time for Ivan to express his opinion, he still said with a face full of alcohol, Good, haha. In the end, Ivan's subordinates left with the excuse that the general drank too much and needed to sleep, but the matter will be reported to Bugnam of Gojosian. Alateng, who was left behind, naturally had a look of joy on his face. After he returned to his tent, he quickly wrote a secret letter to Harsan Khan. The general idea was that his side was progressing well, and he hoped that Harsan Khan wouldn't do anything that would provoke the 5-star army. What Ailton didn't know was that Ivan didn't drink alcohol. He just spilled the liquor on his clothes to create this illusion. As for himself, after returning to his own tent, he continued to prepare for the upcoming battle. Not only that, the commander of the 5-star Army's reconnaissance division, Zhou Xian, had already arranged for people to start investigating the terrain of the Ilkhanate, as well as the distribution of troops. As the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy, and thou shalt be victorious in every battle. When he faced the 300,000 Mongolian cavaliers, Yang Qindong was determined to inflict pain on them and destroy their main force. This was because he was really afraid that the fangs of the 5-star army would scare some people. Once these people fought on their own, it would be much more difficult to eliminate them. This was not the result that Yang Qindong wanted to see. For example, General Maxim of the Novgorod city-state under the Rossi Principality, and Shamask, the leader of the Cherkass people who originally belonged to the Golden Horde, had escaped to who knows where. According to the information sent by the intelligence department, the two of them had long lost their former strength and had become stray dogs. It was likely that they no longer had any decent troops by their side. However, Yang Qindong, who had always believed in cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, would do what he did today and would never leave it until tomorrow, was still somewhat irritating. It was better to avoid trouble if possible. This time he wanted to eliminate as many of the enemy forces as possible and not leave any future troubles. This required the scouts in the early stages to grasp the situation of the battlefield and do their best to analyze the enemy's situation clearly and thoroughly. This was to ensure that they didn't take action, but if they did, it would be a heavy blow. The snow is about to melt. Tell Commander Zhou Xian to hurry up and understand the enemy's situation. They don't have much time left. Yang Qindong instructed Beta Persei and put him in charge of monitoring this matter. Time passed day by day, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 3rd month of spring. Although spring came later in the Ilkhanate, the day of the attack was getting closer and closer. At this time, the negotiations between Ivan and Alting had entered a substantial stage. The so-called substantial stage involved the issue of compensation. In other words, what kind of price would the Ilkhanate have to pay to satisfy the 5-star army and make them retreat without fighting? Although the Ilkhanate had never offended the 5-star army and this was a completely unexpected disaster, the bigger the fist, the harder the argument. Since their strength was inferior, they had to hold back even if they had any ideas. Not only did they have to hold back, but Alting also had to pretend to be very happy and try his best to satisfy the various conditions proposed by Ivan. Only in this way could they stop the war and complete this difficult task. The two of them sat in a military tent. First, Alting repeated the price that the Ilkhanate was willing to pay. For example, how much gold and silver, how many horses and sheep, and even a certain number of slaves they were willing to hand over to the 5-star army in order to avoid this war. This was the rule between the defeated Ilkhanates. Once one side lost, they would send these things to the winner, in order to ensure that they could barely survive. Ivan sat on the chair expressionlessly, quietly listening to Alting's narration without any expression on his face. He didn't look happy, nor did he look disappointed. It was this expression that made Alting a little overwhelmed. He didn't know if the other side was satisfied with what he said, so he always looked at Ivan with an inquiring look. How could he know that at this time, Ivan was thinking about the military order that he had just received in the morning? The higher-ups wanted the troops to prepare for war, and in 3 to 5 days they would launch a fierce attack. Because of Ivan's recent performance, his original 1,000 soldiers were promoted to 2,000, and he had an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers under his command. Logically speaking, having an army under his command was a good thing, but Ivan wasn't like others. He was very clear that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to gain Yang Qindong's complete trust. Since that was the case, why would he be given an additional 1,000 soldiers? Moreover, they were Russian soldiers. He was the young master of the Rus Duchy. Logically speaking, all Russians were his subordinates, his own people. In order to prevent him from betraying, even if he was to increase the number of soldiers, it should be the Mongolian army and not the Russian army. What was Yang Qindong trying to do? Was he testing him? Or was it because his performance had won the other party's trust and he was really going to give him power? After thinking about it, Ivan ruled out the second possibility. In other words, it was impossible to have absolute trust. Then the only thing left was to test him. Even though he knew that it was a test, Ivan still had more soldiers under his command, especially after gaining an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers. He had more ideas in his mind. For example, could he use the upcoming war with the Ilkhanate to create an opportunity for himself to escape? Just like Marguzim, once he escaped, the 5-star army would be like looking for a needle in a haystack if they wanted to catch him. In this way, as long as he avoided the other party's initial search, he could find a safe place to develop again. Once he grew stronger, it would be time for him to return to Eastern Europe and take back everything he had lost. Of course, it was still unknown whether Magus Maximus would be able to survive under the suppression of other forces. However, the conceited Ivan believed that with his ability and identity, he would have no problem surviving and growing stronger. It was precisely because there were too many thoughts in his mind that he couldn't calm down. As for Alaton's words, he couldn't listen. General Ivan, are you listening? After seeing Ivan's obviously distracted expression, Ailton didn't continue talking and changed to calling him softly. Oh, I'm listening, please continue. After Ivan was woken up, he showed an apologetic expression and said he wanted to calm down because his intuition told him that now wasn't the time to fight back. Yang Qindong must be paying attention to him. But there was another voice in his mind that kept calling him. If he didn't take this opportunity to fight back, he didn't know when the next opportunity would come. If that was the case, could he really keep waiting? Would his character and self-esteem allow him to do that? The strength of the Ilkhanate was average and it wasn't a good partner to cooperate with. But he didn't expect the other party to really defeat the 5-star army. As long as the Ilkhanate's main force was delayed, it should be possible to create an opportunity for him to escape. Ailton said that in order to deal with the 5-star army, the Ilkhanate borrowed 300,000 cavalries from the other Khanates. 300,000 cavalries, they should be able to create some trouble for the 5-star army and make them unable to take care of him. At that time his opportunity might come. Ivan was very clear about his own strength. He didn't want to leave in a daze. What he wanted was to kill Yang Qindong. Only in this way could the 5-star army be in chaos and he could return to Eastern Europe to reorganize. Compared to Maxim, who had disappeared without a trace after escaping and was now hiding in some unknown mountain, what he wanted to do was to retake Moscow and lead the Rossi people to stand up again. And he firmly believed that as long as there was no Yang Qindong in front of him, he might be able to do this. When he looked at Alting, who was still speaking with a fawning expression on his face, he couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty in his heart. Is such a person suitable to be my ally? Forget it, he seemed to have no other choice. In the situation where he didn't know when the next opportunity would be, he could only give it a try. Ivan suddenly got up and walked to the door of the tent. He saw that the person guarding the door was the former palace guard, and he was absolutely trustworthy. When he saw that there was nothing abnormal outside, he coughed and turned to Ailton. You're going to be in big trouble, do you know that? What? Ailton asked as if he didn't understand. But at this moment his face had already turned pale, and he had an extremely terrified look on his face. He had revealed his cowardly side without a doubt. Chapter 1488. In the main tent, Dao Xiao, the captain of the 2nd Black Cavalry who was responsible for monitoring Ivan's tent, was reporting the situation. It looks like everything is normal, there is no problem. Hey, you can go. Listening to Dao Xiao's words for a long time, Yang Qindong waved his hand. Dao Xiao retreated, leaving only Beta Persei in the tent. Seeing Yang Qindong's eyebrows seem to be frowning together, he asked puzzledly, Young master, didn't Captain Dao say that everything is normal? What are you worried about? Oh, normal is abnormal. Yang Qindong shook his head. He has an intuition that in the face of such a good opportunity, Ivan will do something. Because he firmly believes that the two of them are the same in their bones, they are the kind of people who are unwilling to live under someone else's roof, and they have strong national characteristics. The more so, the more impossible it is for such a person to truly surrender to another person. Now that there is no action, it doesn't mean that his temperament has changed, it's just that there is no suitable opportunity. In order to make the other party reveal their true colors, he deliberately strengthened the other party's military power in order to accelerate the other party's intention to rise. He doesn't believe that Ivan will continue to wait under the conditions of internal and external troubles. He will definitely do it, Yang Qindong firmly believes. Are the ninjas of Japan in place? Yang Qindong suddenly got up and asked as if he thought of something. Young Master Chuishiko has arrived. There are 50 ninjas with him. Beta Persei had already received the report, but because there were only 51 people he didn't report this small matter. Very good, tell Chuishiko to come down and see me. Remember, see me secretly, no one except the Black Cavalry should know about this. Yang Qindong ordered. Just as Yang Qindong arranged everything in the main tent, the messenger of Ilkhanate, Alateng, was sitting in his tent with a pale face. If one took a closer look they would notice that his body was trembling. Yes, Alerting was very scared at this moment. When he suddenly found that his efforts these days not only did not help the Ilkhanate, but also helped the tyrant, he hated himself to death. Why did he trust the 5-star army so much? They had actually made preparations to attack the Khanate behind his back. It was a pity that he was still kept in the dark and was still thinking of using peaceful means to solve the problem. If it wasn't for what Ivan had said to him today and even told him about the military plans of the 5-star army, he would probably still be full of longing for the future. The Han people's way of saying one thing and doing another made Alting completely lose hope in the peace talks. What he needed to do now was to send the general military plan of the 5-star army back to the Khanate. This was the most important thing. However, when he thought of the fully armed 5-star army soldiers outside the tent, how could he do that? General Ivan had already said that there was nothing he could do about this matter, and that he needed to find a way himself. Solution? Where did the solution come from? When he thought of the failure of the peace talks, his value as an emissary would be gone, and he might even die here. His whole body was covered in cold sweat. He really didn't want to die. It was better to live than to die. When he thought of living, Alting's gaze fell on his bag. There was a kind of herb inside. After eating it, people would foam at the mouth and become unconscious. It was like being poisoned. The process was no different from peeling off a layer of skin. The advantage was that he could recover after some treatment. Although he would have to suffer a lot, it was better than dying. This was originally the preparation he made before. If he couldn't go against the situation, he might be able to escape with this method. After all, the 5-star army didn't want an emissary to die in their camp. It wouldn't be good if word got out. People who were afraid of death were always strange. They would always think of all kinds of solutions. He originally thought that this time the peace talks would go smoothly and he wouldn't need to use this thing, but now it seems that he still had to take this step. Let's hope it can fool the 5-star army. Alting sighed in his heart. He came to the bag, took out the herb disguised as a tea cake, got a cup of water and swallowed it. About half an hour later, Yang Qindong was in the tent reading the telegram sent by Qian City. It said that the first batch of engines was finally replicated. With the help of a large number of books and most importantly with the help of realistic reference materials, the engine problem of the motorcycle was finally solved. Once there were no problems with the trial production, Yang Qindong would have the first batch of motorcycles. It would accelerate the transportation ability on land and increase the mobility of the 5-star army by more than one level. Just as he was sighing about the various benefits this initiative would bring, Deputy Captain Badeo Jiang, who was in charge of tonight's shift, walked in. 6th Young Master, General Ivan suddenly sent a message saying that the emissary of the Ilkhanate is in critical condition. What should we do? His life is in danger. This sudden news interrupted Yang Qindong's train of thought. He couldn't help but raise his head and ask. Yes, that's what the report said. I've already arranged for the doctor to check on him. There should be a result soon. Badeo Jiang nodded and replied. Just as they were talking, there was another report from outside the door. Then the military doctor came in to report that the emissary named Alting was indeed poisoned. His condition was very bad and he could die at any time. 6th Young Master, the emissary is dying, but the military doctor said that he shouldn't die so quickly. After all, Alting is quite fat, so he should be able to last for a day or two. Should we send him away? Badeo Jiang carefully suggested. Is this what you mean? Yang Qindong asked with interest after listening. No, this is what General Ivan said in his report. He thinks that since he's an emissary, he represents the face of the Ilkhanate. If such an important person dies in our camp, there will be a lot of problems. Since that's the case, it's best to send him away while he's still alive. We can ask the Ilkhanate to send another emissary here. Thinking of what Ivan said in his report, Badao Jiang said almost exactly the same thing. Yang Qindong heard that this was Ivan's idea, and a smile appeared on his face. Well, since that's the case, let's do as General Ivan said. After all, the emissary's problem has always been this person's responsibility, right? Hearing that Yang Qindong agreed, Badao Jiang nodded and turned around to pass on the order. Leaving Yang Qindong alone in the command tent, he closed the contents of the telegram and unconsciously hummed a tune that no one had heard before. Badao Jiang left the command tent and saw Ivan waiting anxiously 100 meters away. General Ivan, the sixth young master, said that you've always been responsible for the emissary's problem. Since Alting is dying, immediately send him away and ask them to send another emissary. By the way, the emissary's food needs to be carefully checked in the future to prevent this from happening again. The last sentence was added by Badao Jiang himself. He felt that it was necessary to say it. And because of this sentence, the suspicion in Ivan's heart was dispelled. He even suspected that Yang Qindong had seen through his trick. But when he heard this sentence, his face relaxed a lot. Okay, I'll be careful in the future. Then I'll go arrange it. Ivan turned around and left, lamenting Alting's decisiveness in his heart. Originally, he was curious about how Alting would leave the 5-star army's camp. He didn't expect Alting to go all out and use such an extreme method. Although Ivan didn't know how Alting did it. But his intuition told him that Alting would be fine. At most he would suffer a little. This was all because Alting was afraid of death, and people who were afraid of death would always think of many ways to survive. Ivan watched as the Ilkhanate's emissary group left. He looked at Alting, who was carried on a stretcher and didn't say a word from the beginning to the end, only foaming at the mouth from time to time. He was really worried. He was afraid that the medicine would be too strong and that Alting wouldn't be able to last until he saw Ilkhanate. But at this point there was no use in hesitating. He had already told Alting about the 5-star army's attack plan, and it wouldn't be long before Ilkhanate knew about it. That would be equivalent to betraying the 5-star army. In that case there was no turning back. I hope everything goes well. He sighed. At this moment, Ivan looked in the direction of the central camp. He knew that if the plan went well, his ultimate goal would be there. At that time, with his 500 palace guards, he might have a chance of winning. If he could really kill Yang Qindong, his plan would be a success. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since Alting left. In these 3 days they didn't see any emissaries from Ilkhanate. Not only that, just a moment ago, Commander Su Yunxing found out that a large number of cavalry had been mobilized in Ilkhanate's territory. From the looks of it, they were about to go to war. The sudden change was heard by some generals and they couldn't understand it. Could it be that some information was leaked? Or did Ilkhanate have no intention of negotiating at all? They were just like him, using the peace talks to buy time, but were actually secretly preparing? In the central camp, Yang Qindong also received the battle report from the scout division. He raised his eyebrows, and his eyes revealed a trace of undetectable killing intent. Summon all generals above division level. Come in for a meeting. In less than half an hour, all the officers above division level had arrived in the central camp. There were also a few people who were stationed far away, so they would catch up in a short time. But Yang Qindong didn't need to wait for them. Speed was the most important thing in war. Since the other side was already prepared, if he didn't act early, he would lose the initiative. Chapter 1489. Seeing that most of the people had arrived, Yang Qindong stood up from his seat. Following his action, everyone immediately fell silent. Everyone looked at Yang Qindong expectantly, waiting for his decision. This king originally wanted to solve the problem of the Ilkhanate peacefully. However, there are some people who don't believe in heresy. They don't believe that our 5-star army is invincible. They still want to fight. Since this is the case, we should use our actions to tell some people that those who provoke our 5-star army will definitely die. Is everyone confident? Yes. The high-ranking officers all shouted in unison. Their voices were so loud that it seemed like they wanted to flip the roof of the tent over. Very good. Since that is the case, I will now announce the battle order. Considering that the Ilkhanate is already prepared this time, we will change the attack plan appropriately. The initial battle plan will remain unchanged, but midway through it will be. As Yang Qindong spoke, the battle plan changed accordingly. In the later stages, it was completely different from the original plan. Could even be described as a facade. Although he wasn't 100% sure that Ivan had already told Alton about the army's battle plan, he still made some changes for the sake of safety. It had to be said that this was the original battle plan in his heart. The previous battle plan was only used to test the waters. Hearing this plan, many of the officers revealed a shocked expression. They had a feeling that this plan was simply a copy of the first battle plan. It was to make up for the shortcomings of the first battle plan. It could also be said that it was a trap. It was a plan that was based on the first battle plan's defense. In the end, if someone knew about their previous battle plan and used it as a defense, then the second battle plan would beat them so badly that even their parents would not be able to recognize them. Yang Qindong's words were orders. His authority had already reached a level that no one dared to question. Thus, even though some of the officers had doubts in their hearts, no one raised them. Instead, they remembered their duty and mission. Then they walked out of the tent and went to the army to arrange the battle. The tent that was originally packed with people quickly became spacious and empty. Yang Qindong's gaze also swept to Beta Persei. Young master, Beta Persei seemed to have been waiting for the scene to happen. When he saw Yang Qindong's gaze sweep over him, he had a flattering smile on his face and even straightened his body. Needless to say, when Beta Persei showed this expression, it was equivalent to asking for battle. Speaking of which, Yang Heir was a war maniac. What he should do the most was to lead an army into battle and demonstrate the value and significance of his existence by swinging his saber and chopping. It was not appropriate to let such a person stay by Yang Qindong's side. However, Yang Qindong still did so. It was all because by his side he would come into contact with many confidential matters. Once these things were spread out, the consequences would not be small. They would be very serious. Therefore, it was necessary to use an absolutely loyal person to reassure him. Beta Persei was such a loyal person. Facts also proved that he knew a lot of those very confidential things, but did he not spread any of them? In order to compensate Beta Persei, Yang Qindong would also let him perform on the battlefield if there was a suitable opportunity. Now was the right time. Looking at the eager Beta Persei, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "Well, I know what you're thinking. How about this? I'll allow you to lead the Black Cavalry. Well, take 1,800 people with you. You only need to leave 200 people behind for Ba Daojiang." Hearing that he could lead the Black Cavalry to the battlefield, Beta Persei was extremely excited. But when he heard that he had to take away so many people at once and only leave 200 people behind, Beta Persei was still a little worried. "Young master, just leave." "What? Don't you believe in the young master's strength? Well, I'll let you go, so just go. You know, this time the other party has 300,000 cavalry. If we want to win, we need to break through the other party's camp at the first opportunity and not give them the slightest chance to resist. So we have to go all out. I also hope that the Black Cavalry can be like an invincible sharp knife, piercing straight into the enemy's heart. Can this mission be completed?" "Please rest assured, young master, I promise to complete the mission." Beta Persei was so excited that he stood at attention on the spot. "Well, go and get ready. Remember, the sharp knife can't be unsheathed at will. Once it's unsheathed, it must see blood." Naturally, Yang Qindong would not treat the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards as ordinary cavalry. What he wanted was to see a miracle. This required them to learn to grasp the opportunity and not appear at the beginning of the battle and reveal their trump cards. After Beta Persei carefully pondered over this sentence, he nodded and said, "Please rest assured, Sixth Master, this little one will remember." Beta Persei left the tent and Ba Daojiang quickly walked in. "Sixth young master, everything has been arranged. But only 200 people are left. Second brother has also been sent out. Isn't it too dangerous?" Yang Qindong knew what Ba Daojiang was worried about, so he shook his head and said, "If we don't do this, some people won't be moved. Besides, we do need more sharp knives on the battlefield. The Ilkhanate is only our first opponent. There will be more enemies in the future. If we lose too many people in this battle, it won't be good for our next operations." At this moment the 400,000 soldiers that Yang Chendong had brought with him looked mighty and powerful. But he knew better than anyone that this strength was only on the surface. At this time they were facing the most important problem, which was that they had no backup. With their current location, no matter where they were too far away. Whether it was military supplies or soldiers, they couldn't replenish them immediately. Once they suffered a heavy blow, they could only retreat and return to Eastern Europe to replenish their supplies. Or they could charge forward and kill their way out to meet up with the new army and the new 5 armies in the Ilkhanate region. But it would be very difficult to break through the layers of obstacles. Since the situation was like this, it required Yang Chendong to take every step to inflict the greatest amount of damage to the enemy with the smallest price. And sending out as many troops as possible would increase their chances of winning. As for the danger they might encounter, it was nothing if they were prepared. Ba Daojiang, have you obtained the firearms from the 2nd Division of Lung Feng? They are all here. The appropriate arrangements have been made. Ba Daojiang nodded heavily, his eyes filled with excitement. With these firearms he wouldn't be afraid no matter how many enemies came. Even. He was only a commander of 2,000 people, and he wasn't qualified to participate in the military meeting that Yang Chendong was hosting. As such, he didn't know about the changes in the battle plan. Otherwise, with his intelligence he would have given up all the prepared actions after knowing all of this. That way Yang Chendong wouldn't have the chance to deal with him. As Ivan's subordinate Qi Wen, one of the generals of the Golden Horde, was the current commander of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. The Meng Army is divided into 5 divisions, each of which has 40,000 people. The 1st Division commander is Wu Shugu, the 2nd Division commander is He, the 3rd Division commander is Qi Wen, the 4th Division commander is Baru, and the 5th Division commander is Wu Tuo. The Forerunner Division has 100,000 people and is split into 2 divisions. The 1st Division is Ahuli and the 2nd Division is Nikolov. The 1st Division has 50,000 people. In his tent, Ivan and a dozen other commanders of 2,000 people gathered and listened to the battle plan that General Qi Wen had arranged for them. Due to Yang Chendong's warning, no one knew if the Ilkhanate had bribed the generals to know about the battle plan in advance. Therefore, Qi Wen didn't mention anything about the change in the battle plan. He only said one sentence at the end of the meeting. On the battlefield, changes can happen at any time. It is very likely that we will have to make some changes according to these changes. When the time comes, everyone just needs to wait for orders. This was something that should be done. If they followed the designated route, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any unknown problems. Therefore, when the battle plan was changed, everyone who had led troops for many years was already used to it. Even Ivan didn't have any other thoughts after hearing this. He only knew that the 5-star army's battle plan didn't change, and that was enough. As long as the Ilkhanate was prepared, they would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, and then his chance would come. Ivan followed the others out of the tent of Qi Wen, the general of 30,000 men. Not far away, his captain Corella was waiting for him. The former deputy captain of his father-in-law's guards was one of the few people that Ivan could trust now. Gongzi, we have already inquired. In order to end this battle quickly, the Black Cavalry has also been dispatched. Someone saw Beta Persei leave the camp with 1,800 cavalrymen. At this moment, there are only 200 men left in the main tent to guard. Corella said in an excited but not loud voice as he walked beside Ivan. After he finished speaking, Corella still asked with a little worry, "Young master, you said this is a heaven-sent opportunity? Is it a trap waiting for us to jump in?" Corella was indeed worthy of being the deputy captain of the blind Grand Duke's guards. He was full of brains. Just from his words, it could be proved that he had indeed thought about the current situation. Ivan walked step by step towards his own camp, a pensive expression on his face. This battle was naturally important for the 5-star army. If they could defeat the Ilkhanate and the 300,000 cavalrymen in one fell swoop, their morale was bound to soar. It would also let the name of the 5-star army spread to some of the nearby khanates. This would undoubtedly play a strong deterrent role. In this way, the limelight would be unparalleled for a while, and it was not impossible for some people to surrender to the 5-star army. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.